Chapter 857. Along with Wu Ming's words, the tip of the blade of salvation began to gather flames, and the flames slowly grew bigger. In the end, it turned into a sun, instantly illuminating the capital of glorious flames and even the entire outer gate of the 54545 division. Although the entire burning fiery capital was also filled with flames at night, at this moment, the light of the flames could only serve as a foil to the sun, produced by the holy sword that could even split a star. The people who were retreating from raging flame capital couldn't help but slow down their footsteps when they saw this scene. However, Mandela frowned. This would greatly slow down their retreat, which was quite disadvantageous. Everyone. Lord Vilo Silenseed, who defeated the demon king who attacked during the fire dragon birth ceremony, is a good friend of Lord White Yiksha, and his strength no weaker than Lord White Yiksha, is fighting against the enemy who attacked us. We must seize the opportunity to retreat and not drag Lord Vilo down. At that moment, Shadora, who appeared out of nowhere, shouted. When everyone heard this, it was as if they were awakened. They all sped up their retreat. After all, Wu Ming was covering for them. If they continued to stand there and watch, it would really be inexcusable. Although Shadora's voice could not reach the entire retreating team, many people who had begun to speed up their retreat would repeat Shadora's words when they saw someone slowing down. In this way, the news that the hero of No Name was covering for their retreat spread wider and wider. More and more people sped up their retreat. In the end, before the black mud infected the entire fiery capital, everyone retreated. It could be said that Shadora's urging words had indirectly helped Wu Ming and No Name gain a wave of popularity. This made Mandela, who had finally found Shadora, feel rather helpless. Because this was completely using Salamandra as a stepping stone to help Wu Ming and No Name advertise. The people who covered the retreat of the residents of Fiery Capital were not the local Salamandra people, but the 7-digit number of No Name people from the outer gate. Although the enemy was too strong, this also reflected Wu Ming's strength. Simply put, Salamandra was at a disadvantage no matter what. Although Mandela did not fully understand the situation, in his opinion, Absolute Evil's release definitely had something to do with Wu Ming. The group of suspicious people at the entrance had obviously come from Salamandra. Since Wu Ming was able to stop the group of suspicious people at the entrance of Salamandra, if Wu Ming said that he was not aware of the situation, Mandela would not believe him at all. If Wu Ming had told Salamandra earlier, things would not have turned out this way. However, back then, Mandela did not tell Wu Ming what was sealed in Salamandra. It was his own doing. In short, although Mandela had some complaints about Wu Ming, he could only grit his teeth and swallow it. Moreover, Absolute Evil's seal had been unlocked and there were new changes. At present, he could only ask Wu Ming to temporarily stall Absolute Evil. However, if Wu Ming knew that Shadora was helping him advertise, he would not know whether to laugh or cry. Wu Ming did not know what Az Dakaha was like in the past, but after fusing with the Black Mud, Az Dakaha was originally living well in the source of the Black Mire underground. If Wu Ming had not come, Az Dakaha would not have come out for a while. If he had to say something, it was Wu Ming who had prompted Az Dakaha to come out of the underground ahead of time. Wu Ming was very clear about this. Therefore, if Wu Ming knew that Shadora had helped him and his community gain a wave of fame, he would probably be embarrassed for a while. However, Wu Ming was not likely to think about these things now. After all, the enemy was right in front of them. Wu Ming infused the countless magical powers in his body into the divine blade of salvation. The entire sun at the tip of the sword underwent an indescribable change. Of course, this was only in the eyes of outsiders. In the eyes of Wu Ming and Az Dakaha, this sun was filled with lethality. It was especially so for Az Dakaha. At this moment, he felt a threat to his life. Roar! The black monster spread its black dragon wings and scattered a large amount of black mud in an attempt to rush up to Wu Ming and gain the upper hand by striking first. However, Wuming naturally wouldn't give Az-Dakaha this opportunity. His arm that was holding the divine blade of salvation swung down abruptly, and the sun, at the tip of the sword, struck straight at Az-Dakaha. In an instant, the two of them collided. Scorching flames and incomparably dazzling white light shrouded everyone's eyes. At this moment, Golden Flame City was brighter than during the day. Shortly after, the aftermath of the explosion erupted in the sky and swept in all directions. The scale of the heat wave was so huge that everyone who had retreated from Golden Flame City couldn't help but extend their arms to support their bodies to resist the heat wave. It's really like the sun. Mandela poked his head out. Although the sun in the sky had disappeared, the aftermath of the explosion was still emitting light and extreme heat. Golden Flame City was still as bright as day. Besides, Mandela was filled with all sorts of emotions after witnessing Wuming's strength once again. Wuming was still in existence that no one dared to look up to. However, unlike Mandela, the others were more concerned about whether the monster had been defeated by Wuming. Has it been defeated? It was unknown who said this. At this moment, before the aftermath of the explosion in the sky dissipated, a black figure fell from the sky. Everyone focused their gaze and realized that it was the black monster. The monster was defeated by the hero. However, before everyone could rejoice, they realized that the black mire on the ground had begun to extend toward the sky as if it was going to catch the monster. In fact, that was indeed the case. The black monster was caught by the high platform made of black mire. The monster stood firm and looked at the sky again, as if provoking the hero who had just shot it down. This was also a signal that the monster had not been defeated by the hero. It had only been shot down, and the danger was still there. Cover the evacuation of the residents immediately. Mandela, who saw this scene, immediately ordered the members of Salamandra. Mandela thought to himself, as expected, it's impossible for the opponent to be defeated by a non-human existence in the final trial. Golden Flame City was no longer safe, and the entire outer gate of 54,545 was no longer safe either. They had to evacuate from this outer gate as soon as possible. Yes. Yes. Some of the members of Salamandra seemed to have yet to react to the series of events just now. They were stunned for a while before agreeing. After Mandela's reminder, all the residents of Golden Flame City hurriedly took action. They were not fools. It was obvious that the monster could not be killed in a short time. Moreover, the black mire was still spreading, so they had to retreat to a safer place. Fortunately, because they had just experienced the Demon King's attack during the day, not all the residents of Golden Flame City returned to Golden Flame City. In addition, the people of Box Ting were used to various disasters, so the following retreat was more orderly. If it were ordinary people in the outside world, the fire caused by the black mire would have burned everyone to ashes. Wuming, who was flying high in the sky, looked at the people around Golden Flame City gradually dispersing. He was inexplicably relieved. Chapter 858. Wuming could not understand what was going on in the minds of the residents of the box. In the face of such a disaster, they just stood around and watched. Why were they so calm? But at least they retreated in the end. With that in mind, Wuming looked down at Az-Dakaha, who was staring at him like an abyss. In this way, Wuming could deal with this guy with peace of mind. According to the information provided by Galji, Az-Dakaha, the absolute evil, was originally an evil god at the peak of evil in the Persian Zoroastrianism mythology. For some reason, he became the absolute evil in one of the final trials of humans in the box. Wuming was not afraid of Az-Dakaha. After all, he was just an evil god. Wuming had never been afraid of gods. The half-Godslayer authority he obtained in the Godslayer world constantly reminded Wuming that Aziz was a god that needed to be killed. The reason why it was half-Godslayer was because Wuming's previous deeds had been completed in the Godslayer world, and he had obtained the half-Godslayer qualification. Wuming had left his inheritance in Uruk, and he had killed the last king, Rama, and replaced him. It could be said that Wu-Ming was a contradictory existence that was both a god-slayer and a god. However, Aziz Dakaha was not just an evil god in the Zoroastrianism. In this box, he had become one of the final trials of humans. And in the final trial of humans, he had to be defeated, surpassed, by humans. This was why Mandela wanted Wu-Ming to temporarily stall Aziz Dakaha instead of defeating him. But, that attack just now should have killed Aziz Dakaha, right? Yes, Wu-Ming's blow just now did hit Aziz Dakaha, and Aziz Dakaha's breath at that time was also in a state of death. The Blade of Salvation was a so-called planet-destroying weapon. Even if Aziz Dakaha was an evil god, he would not be able to withstand the powerful blow of the Blade of Salvation in a head-on clash. That was why Wu-Ming said that he had killed Aziz Dakaha. However, Wu-Ming had subconsciously forgotten that this was the Box Garden world. The fire worship sect's three-headed demonic dragon, Aziz Dakaha, had indeed died. However, humans would never be killed by non-human beings in the final trial. Therefore, Quan Ting's system allowed Aziz Dakaha to come back to life. "You can't kill me, my old enemy." At this moment, Aziz Dakaha spoke, but for some reason, all three of his heads spoke at the same time, speaking with emphasis to Wu-Ming. "You still have self-awareness." Wu-Ming was shocked. After all, no matter who it was, they would think that the three-headed monster that was covered in black mud and whose original appearance could not be seen clearly and could only roar furiously had lost its mind. "I am evil to begin with. How can I be controlled by this filth?" Aziz Dakaha's three heads replied together in a mocking tone to Wu-Ming. When the black mud came into contact with Aziz Dakaha, the black mud had already become evil filth under Aziz Dakaha's evil nature. Therefore, it was not wrong for Aziz Dakaha to call the black mud filth. Moreover, a monster should maintain the appearance of a monster. Have you ever seen a monster talk to another person? It was still a mocking tone, but it also explained why Aziz Dakaha had not spoken before. Aziz Dakaha had always followed the rules of Quan Ting. He was a monster that gave humans the final trial. How could a monster talk to a human? "You keep saying that you are a monster, but you talk to me. Don't you find that very contradictory?" Wu-Ming asked in return. "But you are also not a human, my kind." Ha ha ha, the three-headed dragon laughed loudly. The laughter of the three heads was indeed very penetrating. Even the retreating troops outside the city could hear the evil laughter. Aziz Dakaha was not wrong. He had already fused with the black mud and could be considered half of Wu-Ming's kind. However, this did not mean that Wu-Ming would reconcile with Aziz Dakaha. "I do hope that you, the so-called one of my kind, can obediently return to your own seal." "That's impossible." "My kind." Aziz Dakaha's three heads stared at Wu-Ming. "If I don't kill you, I won't be able to take it." For example, humans had to eat and drink. As an existence that had fused with the black mud, Aziz Dakaha was hostile to Wu-Ming due to the black mud. This caused Aziz Dakaha to half-willingly choose to eliminate Wu-Ming. What's more, I still have the responsibility of giving the humans the final trial. If I don't destroy the humans, I will also feel terrible. Ha ha ha, Aziz Dakaha's words were as casual as if he was talking about eating and drinking. Wu-Ming could not understand the meaning behind Aziz Dakaha's words. Then, Wu-Ming pointed the divine blade of salvation at Aziz Dakaha. "Then, there is nothing to talk about between us. I will destroy you, just like those guys before. You will not be able to do it. If you want to know why, it is because..." Aziz Dakaha lowered his head, then suddenly raised it. "I will destroy you here and now." After saying that, countless black mud turned into giant pillar-like tentacles that rushed into the sky like poisonous snakes that were about to prey on birds. "Then you can try," Wu-Ming said as he charged at Aziz Dakaha. While dodging the tentacles, Wu-Ming thought of a way to deal with Aziz Dakaha. Aziz Dakaha had just admitted that Wu Ming had indeed killed him, but there was no doubt that he had immediately revived. According to the information provided by Galji, according to the rules of the box court, in order to kill absolute evil, one had to destroy the other party's head, shoulders, and heart. It was said that the head and shoulders had been permanently damaged, so all one had to do was destroy absolute evil's heart. However, this method would not work on Wu Ming. It would be fine if it was just absolute evil, but the problem was that the other party had already fused with the black mud. The permanent damage to the head and shoulders could not be seen at all. Moreover, who knew if Aziz Dakaha's original weakness had changed after fusing with the black mud? Even if it was still his weakness, Wu Ming did not think that absolute evil would die just because his head, shoulders, and heart were destroyed. Absolute evil's revival was a good example. Therefore, according to the rules of the box court world, I have to solve the human's final trial, absolute evil, gift game to stop Aziz Dakaha from reviving. Chapter 859. Wu Ming had his reasons for thinking this way. As the human's final trial, there must be a setting where only a human can completely kill the other party. In order to prevent Az Dakaha from reviving, one must solve the riddle of the human's final trial, absolute evil. In the end, all the conditions were met, and one must possess enough strength to kill Az Dakaha. Wu Ming's personal guess was that only by meeting all three of these conditions could absolute evil Az Dakaha be completely killed. Wu Ming definitely had the strength. As for the wisdom to solve the bestowment game, Wu Ming believed that he could solve the riddle of absolute evil if given some time. However, he could not achieve the first condition of being a human no matter what. Even if his soul was extremely close to that of a human and he had a human name, Wu Ming was still an inhuman existence. He was the root dragon. Therefore, Wu Ming could not kill absolute evil by normal means. The reason why it was normal was because of the restrictions brought about by the root dragon's exempt box system. Although Wu Ming could participate in the bestowment game, the punishment for failing the bestowment game would not take effect on Wu Ming. Wu Ming, who had the identity of the root dragon, did not need to comply with these three conditions from the beginning. He could rely on his own strength to kill Az Dakaha. However, Az Dakaha had the root black mud. The root black mud might have brought unexpected benefits to Az Dakaha. For example, it made Wu Ming unclear of Az Dakaha's current abilities, intelligence, and weaknesses. However, as Wu Ming was the nemesis of the root black mud could be said to have given Wu Ming an advantage in dealing with Az Dakaha. That was all there was to the nemesis. Wu Ming could completely ignore the series of conditions that he had deduced earlier and directly kill Az Dakaha. Therefore, from the beginning, Wu Ming only needed to use the power of the root dragon to ignore all factors and achieve the conditions to directly kill Az Dakaha. Of course, Wu Ming only thought of this now, but there was a blind spot at the moment. Whether this body can produce the power of origin is another matter. While dodging the black mud tentacles, Wu Ming could not help but frown. Although when he returned to the box, Wu Ming adjusted the spiritual base to the perfect standard for a servant, Wu Ming was still unsure whether it could produce the power of origin. As the clones of the heroic spirits, the attributes of the servant's interface were fixed. Wu Ming's spiritual base was the same. Although Wu Ming had broken this rule a few times, there was a reason for it. When he fought against Garna, the last noble phantasm that Wu Ming used was a temporarily modified noble phantasm. The reason why it could be like that was because at that time, Wu Ming's servant identity was Sodlek, which was a character that Wu Ming had fabricated in history, so he could change it however he wanted. Secondly, the world at that time was the native world of the inhibitors, and the inhibitors had a lot of power at that time, so they did not want the humans to be burned down. Because of these 2 points, Wu Ming's spiritual base could be arbitrarily modified on the spot at that time. Also, relying on the power of the Holy Grail to modify the spiritual base, Wu Ming changed from Saber Sodlek to Caster Urukyenryong. After all, the Holy Grail was a cheat, and Wu Ming himself was also a cheat, so it was not surprising that he could do this. Now, if Wu Ming wanted to modify the spiritual base on the spot, apart from being in the root, he had to rely on Wu Ming's own body, or his original body. The first time Wu Ming used the power of the root was when he faced Gidia. Although he could use it inexplicably, because Wu Ming's body had stayed in the root for a long time, his body had evolved, so Wu Ming, who often used his clones, was not very clear about it. However, it was the innate power of the root dragon, so it was reasonable for Wu Ming to master it. However, Wu Ming's experience of using the power of the root was only that one time. After all, since then, Wu Ming's body fell into the box garden world and disappeared. Now that he didn't have the Holy Grail, nor did he have any restraining power, and his main body was nowhere to be seen, Wu Ming had no way to change his current spirit base. Wu Ming clearly sensed the aura of his original body just now, but he couldn't sense it now. If Wu Ming didn't look for Shadora, he might be able to find his original body. But if he didn't look for Shadora, perhaps, no, it should be certain that something would happen to Shadora today. However, Wu Ming didn't regret it. Although he hated Mandela, he didn't hate Shadora. This little girl who worked hard for the community made him realize that Shadora was worth Wu Ming saving. Anyway, even if Wu Ming didn't save Shadora and directly went to the location of his original body, Wu Ming might not be able to find his original body. After all, Az Dakaha was there. I'm afraid that my original body was covered by the black mud again. If there was anything that Wu Ming could think of that could conceal his original body's aura, it would be the black mud. Or perhaps, my original body is now in Az Dakaha's body. While pondering, Wu Ming avoided the black mud tentacles and arrived before Az Dakaha. Roar! Az Dakaha wasn't afraid of Wu Ming. He stood up in his human form and coalesced a huge blade from the black mud, slashing it at Wu Ming. Bzzz. Wu Ming raised his divine blade of salvation to meet the attack. Countless lightning of salvation attached to the divine blade of salvation exploded. In an instant, Az Dakaha, who had already stabilized his body, pointed at Wu Ming. Countless black mud tentacles flew around Wu Ming and wrapped Wu Ming into a sphere that kept compressing. At this moment, a thunderous sound came from the sphere formed by the black mud tentacles wrapped around Wu Ming. Boom! Then, the black mud sphere slowly disintegrated, revealing Wu Ming in the center of the sphere, unharmed. Wu Ming's spirit base couldn't produce origin power on its own, but as an entity that had fused with Wu Ming's main body, the divine blade of salvation had also been strengthened to a certain extent during the Great Origin. While it couldn't completely suppress the black origin soil, it was still tainted with a bit of origin power. Combined with the divine blade of salvation's extraordinary nature, the divine blade of salvation should be able to deal with a certain amount of black origin soil. It should be noted that the divine saber of salvation could easily kill Az Dakaha with a single strike. The best example was the divine saber of salvation's ability to kill Az Dakaha with a single strike. But that wasn't enough. Just relying on the divine blade of salvation was not enough to kill the final trial's absolute evil, Az Dakaha. After all, a quantitative change would lead to a qualitative change. Az Dakaha had now become a vessel for secreting the black mud. Just relying on the divine blade of salvation was not enough. You're still somewhat capable, aren't you? Az Dakaha said as a pair of black shadow-like wings appeared on his back. Then, the black mud on Az Dakaha's body spread over his wings. His shadow wings became tainted wings filled with black mud. Then, let's continue. Let's continue our fight. Chapter 860. Shadora flew in the sky above the 54545 outer gate and looked at the 54545 outer gate with a worried expression. She couldn't sense what was going on inside the gate. A day had passed. At this moment, the entire 54545 outer gate was completely covered by the black mud. However, the people of the 54545 outer gate and their communities had all evacuated from the 54545 outer gate because of Wu Ming's cover. After all, there was no effective way to stop the black mud from spreading. Everyone in the 54545 outer gate could only retreat. In the end, they relied on the boundary wall of the outer gate to stop the black mud from spreading. However, the boundary wall couldn't be used anymore. Not only that, but many places, or rather, the buildings of the entire 54545 outer gate had changed. The black mud seemed to have made a lot of irregular changes in the shape of the original buildings. Not only did it make the 54545 outer gate unrecognizable, but it also blocked the sky of the entire 54545 outer gate like a lush black forest. Moreover, the second change of the black mud also connected, making the 54545 outer gate look like a huge mountain with a lot of holes. One thing was certain. The entire 54545 outer gate had completely turned into Aziz Dakaha's black mud territory. Moreover, it seemed that the black mud had the ability to block detection. The people of the 54545 outer gate couldn't find out what was going on inside, including whether Wuming was alive or dead. There was no movement inside at all. However, the people of the box court couldn't just sit there and wait for death. The members of Salamandra who had retreated from the 54545 outer gate had already united a large number of communities in the surrounding outer gates to form a battle line around the 54545 outer gate. The purpose was to prevent the black mud from spreading. Although the black mud wasn't spreading now, who knew when the black mud would break through the boundary wall and start spreading? It wasn't too late to mend the pen after the sheep were lost, right? The reason why the other communities were so obedient was because Shadora had revealed that the enemy who attacked Glowing Flame Capital and the entire 54545 outer gate was absolutely evil. Moreover, the leader of this alliance was the strongest demon in the North District, Vera Za Ignifast, which was why they were willing to compromise. Moreover, there was nothing they could do even if they did not compromise. If the enemy was absolutely evil, they would definitely die if they did not unite. This was without a doubt. If they were united, there was still hope for survival. Shadora, so you're here, Mandela said in a heavy tone as he flew to Shadora's side. Big brother, will Master Villo be alright? Shadora looked at Mandela worriedly. Seeing his sister's expression, Mandela turned his head to the side. You're the ruler of the hierarchy. Don't always show such an expression. Whether Wuming was fine or not, they had to do their best to survive and think of a way to deal with AZ Dakaha. This was a matter of life and death. Although Mandela didn't answer Shadora directly, she understood what he meant. After all, they were siblings. It's hard to believe. If even Master Villo can't deal with the enemy, can we really deal with it? Shadora said as she looked at the changed outer gate of 54,545 outer gate. And our house. It changed completely in just a day. However, even if it didn't change, it would probably be destroyed by absolute evil. I've already sent out a distress signal to the other classes and reported this to the higher-ups of the box court. If nothing goes wrong, the Sky Army should be here soon. The so-called Sky Army was a special force formed by the upper echelons of the box court to suppress the humans in the final trial. Although not everyone knew about the existence of the Sky Army, Shadora naturally knew about it as the leader of the upper echelons. And Mandela was Shadora's assistant, so he knew about the existence of the Sky Army. Master White Yiksha just replied to me. She said she'll rush over from the East District soon. Don't worry, Mandela comforted Shadora. And Villo isn't weak. I think even if he can't kill absolute evil, he won't be killed by absolute evil. That's true. Shadora sighed and flew to the ground. Seeing Shadora leave, Mandela couldn't help but sigh. Of course, Mandela, who didn't know Wuming very well, said this to comfort Shadora. As one of the oldest god slayers, absolute evil wasn't even afraid of a 2-digit number. Even if Wuming was stronger than a 3-digit number, in Mandela's opinion, it was unlikely that he would survive after fighting absolute evil alone for a day. Absolute evil didn't move at the moment. Perhaps it was resting and recovering from the injuries caused by the battle with Wu Ming, or perhaps it wasn't injured at all and just didn't want to come out for the time being. Either way, they had to be prepared. However, Mandela could only comfort Shadora like this. Shadora had probably already seen through Mandela's intentions, but she could only think so. This was because only by making everyone think that Wu Ming was still inside, delaying Az Dakaha, could they create a winnable atmosphere. Otherwise, they might not be able to set up a defensive line around the outer gate of the 54545 division. Facing an enemy who did not put up a defense but ran away blindly, that would only lead to a faster death. I hope the Sky Army can come as soon as possible. If they only relied on Vera and the upcoming White Yiksha to deal with absolute evil, who had undergone an unknown transformation, they would probably be doomed. They could only rely on the Sky Army in the upper echelons of the temple. Then, Mandela rode the fire dragon and flew down. At this moment, the intense battle was still ongoing in Az Dakaha's Black Mud territory. Countless black mud attacked Wu Ming from all directions, while Wu Ming floated in place and chanted, "For victory, come to me quickly. Undying sun, please bestow upon me a shining steed. Spirited steed, with the lifeline of my root dragon, I bestow upon the eternal glory. Bring me the shining wheel of light that symbolizes me." After Wu Ming finished chanting, the sun instantly erupted from Wu Ming's body. Wu Ming's entire body turned into a fireball. The flames burned hundreds of meters, incinerating the black mud within range. However, even the sun would burn out one day. The fireball incinerated a large amount of black mud, but to Az Dakaha, who had turned the entire outer gate of the 54545 temple into a black mud territory and could continuously produce black mud, Wu Ming's actions were useless. When the fireball burned out, a claw full of power attacked Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming had already begun chanting another spirit. "Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you a curse. Evil people will not be able to hit me." Swoosh! As if he had accelerated in an instant, Wu Ming instantly left his original spot, and the owner of the claw missed. Upon closer inspection, it was the pitch-black Az Dakaha. Wu Ming, who had flown to the other side of Az Dakaha's team, steadied himself and sneered. "Don't always rush over after fainting. This trick has never worked on me from the beginning." However, Az Dakaha also retorted with sarcastic words. "So what? You can't take advantage of me either." Then, Az Dakaha smiled smugly. "Don't forget, you are now trapped here by me." Chapter 861. During the day of constant fighting between Wu Ming and Az Dakaha, as if excessive destruction would usher in new life, Wu Ming destroyed a large amount of black mud, but at the same time, a large amount of black mud was produced, causing the black mud to spread faster. It was said that it covered the entire outer gate of 54,545 in a day, but in fact, it was only because the people outside the outer gate of 54,545 discovered that the black mud had spread to the boundary wall a day later. Moreover, the black mud did not stop spreading because of the boundary wall, but only because of Az Dakaha's order to trap Wu Ming. The boundary wall just happened to be a dividing line. During this period, Wu Ming did not care about how the black mud eroded the outer gate of 54,545. After all, those who should be evacuated had already evacuated. At the same time, Wu Ming did not care about how the black mud gradually trapped him. Wu Ming just kept fighting with Az Dakaha. And Az Dakaha also gave him face. He turned the entire outer gate of 54,545 into his own devil's den, not only to besiege Wu Ming, but also to prevent others from disturbing the fight between Az Dakaha and Wu Ming. Not only did he satisfy Wu Ming's desire to fight with Az Dakaha, but he also prevented outsiders from interfering. As for why, It was because it was related to Wu Ming's plan, although it seemed that Wu Ming was now trapped in this devil's den full of black mud. In fact, Wu Ming was indeed trapped. Whether it was entering the inherent barrier or leaving through the teleportation gate, they were all stopped by Aziz Dakahar's magic. It had to be known that Aziz Dakahar was rumored to have mastered over 1,000 types of magic. Although the final trial was absolutely evil, Aziz Dakahar was still Aziz Dakahar. He could still use over 1,000 types of magic. The boundary and portal were theoretically just the use of space. As long as magic was used properly, it could naturally be blocked. However, Wu Ming did not panic at all. After all, he did not want to leave just like that. Aziz Dakahar was hostile to Wu Ming. This was true. In the continuous confrontation with Aziz Dakahar, Wu Ming became more and more certain of this. Usually, people who had the black mud would become Wu Ming's enemy or treat Wu Ming as an enemy. However, Aziz Dakahar was really serious this time. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an obsession. As the final trial of humans, Aziz Dakahar was obsessed with eliminating Wu Ming first instead of fulfilling his duties as the final trial of humans. This in itself was very abnormal. The rules of the box could not be violated by anyone other than Wu Ming. Although there were some people who took advantage of loopholes, they could only take advantage of small and harmless loopholes. It was simply impossible to take advantage of the box's loopholes. The humans' final trial was the same. Aziz Dakahar, who had been released from the seal, didn't give the humans a trial. Instead, he was competing with Wu Ming here. This was something that was impossible to happen. It was not a problem to fight back against an enemy, but Aziz Dakahar clearly wanted to fight to the death with Wu Ming before doing anything else. Perhaps because of the purity of the black mud, Aziz Dakahar's enmity towards Wu Ming had risen to the level of obsession. The power of the black mud had even placed Aziz Dakahar's duties as the final trial of humans behind his obsession with Wu Ming. Therefore, as long as Wu Ming was still around, Aziz Dakahar would not take on the duties of the final trial of humans. Simply put, Wu Ming had a taunt on him that Aziz Dakahar did not notice at all. Although Wu Ming did not want to taunt Aziz Dakahar at first, he felt that this would restrain Aziz Dakahar and prevent him from harming the outside world. In addition, Wu Ming had his own ideas. Therefore, he and Aziz Dakahar fought in the devil's den for an entire day, or rather, an entire night. Aziz Dakahar was released at night. Now, although Wu Ming could not see the weather outside, based on Wu Ming's sense of time, it was almost nighttime. After a day of fighting, Wu Ming more or less understood what he needed to understand. Do you still have time to be distracted? The 3-meter-tall Aziz Dakahar took advantage of Wu Ming's momentary distraction to rush in front of Wu Ming. A huge dragon claw covered in black mud viciously pressed down on Wu Ming's face. Isn't that a given? After all, even if I'm distracted, you can't do anything to me. Ever since he started fighting with Aziz Dakahar, Wu Ming's psychic energy had been released from his body. As long as anything came within 100 meters of him, Wu Ming could instantly sense it and react. Relying on the power of the sun and phoenix of the 12 avatars, this was why Wu Ming could deal with Aziz Dakahar for a day. Using giant to wrestle in close combat, using vitality to recover himself from time to time, and whenever he was surrounded by black mud, he would use sun to burn it, and then use phoenix to move. Simply put, it felt like Wu Ming was playing with Aziz Dakahar all this time. No, it couldn't be said that, because, lightning. 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 I am the conqueror who can defeat 1,000 with white, 10,000 with 1,000, and 10,000 with 10,000. Now, for me who stands on the side of justice, please shine brightly and bestow upon me divine power. I am the one who will crush all enemies and enmity from humans and demons. Wu Ming, who was facing Aziz Dakahar's palm, quickly chanted the power of Thunder God. Wu Ming himself turned into lightning and quickly distanced himself from Aziz Dakahar. At the same time, he also used lightning to injure Az Dakaha, causing an extremely temporary paralysis effect on Az Dakaha. Turning off the thunder god avatar, Wuming's figure appeared, but the hand that Wuming used to fight with Az Dakaha was pitch black as if it was poisoned. However, as if he had already adapted to this, Wuming didn't panic at all. Then, Wuming chanted the power of divine power again. A person with the supreme divine power of protection. The gods protect him, the demons hate him, and no enemy can get close to him. He is like a fountain of vitality that surges endlessly, granting the world equal protection. After he finished chanting, Wuming's arm returned to normal. Chapter 862. Sure enough, it's not only the blade of salvation that has the aura of origin, but so does my authority. In fact, Wuming had long discovered that his authority had a weak restraining effect on Az Dakaha, or rather, the black mud on Az Dakaha's body. After all, the 12 avatars were the same as the blade of salvation. They were existences that had been baptized together with Wuming in the origin, so they naturally carried the aura of origin. In other words, his authority also had the ability to restrain Az Dakaha, although it was very weak. Similarly, the vitality also had a certain recovery effect on the corrosive damage caused by the black mud, so Wuming, who previously did not dare to fight Az Dakaha in close combat, dared to do so now. However, because the recovery effect was not very optimistic, Wuming could not excessively come into close contact with Az Dakaha for too long. If he came into contact with him too much, the vitality avatar would lose its effectiveness. However, this power alone was far from enough. Whether it was the blade of salvation or the 12 avatars, they contained too little power of origin. Even if Az Dakaha was killed in an instant, Az Dakaha would be healed by the black mud. In addition, this place had now become Az Dakaha's black mud cave. If he did not clean up all the black mud, Az Dakaha's injuries caused by origin would completely disappear as soon as he came into contact with the black mud. No, perhaps even injuries not caused by origin would be healed by Az Dakaha. For example, right now. Although Az Dakaha had injured Wuming in the previous exchange of blows, he had also been injured by a trace of origin power in Wuming's thunder god avatar. However, a black mud tentacle approached Az Dakaha and gently touched him. Az Dakaha's injuries were immediately healed, and it was impossible to tell that he was injured at all. From this, it could be seen that Wuming was still unable to completely destroy Az Dakaha. Without power, you can't do anything to me. You can only be a lowly mouse in my cage, being toyed with by me. Ha ha ha. It was as if he was quite satisfied with Wuming's helpless look, but his laughter only added to the despair. Wuming wasn't a human. Wuming wasn't human. After adjusting his breathing, Wuming began to ponder. According to Az Dakaha, it seemed like he had never used his full strength and was only playing with Wuming. Wuming did not think that Az Dakaha was bluffing. Az Dakaha had once fought against millions of gods and was not at a disadvantage. Although there were only 3 digits of him, he was no weaker than the 2 digits of humans in the final trial. Just the god spirit-level body created from his blood alone was enough to make him suffer. By the way, this information was obtained from Galji by Wuming's clone. This information was mixed in with the Lune runes from before. Perhaps it was because Az Dakaha was covered in black mud, but Wuming had never seen Az Dakaha use the blood clone technique. However, this technique should be considered passive and could not be used actively. Moreover, Az Dakaha's blood had probably been assimilated into the black mud. Did that mean this technique could not be used? Wuming was overthinking things. Since the blood had been assimilated by the black mud, didn't that mean the black mud was Az Dakaha's blood? Roar! Suddenly, Az Dakaha roared. Under Wuming's solemn expression, blurry things appeared from the black mud. There was no doubt that these were Az Dakaha's clones. Roar, roar, roar. These indistinguishable black clones roared in unison, and then rushed in Wu Ming's direction, or it could be said that they were carried by the black mud and flew over. It seemed that Aziz Dakaha was not prepared to continue playing with Wu Ming. Coincidentally, Wu Ming had the same thought. God says, humans are sinful. God says, humans need to be purified. Thus, I bestow the flood upon my body. In the name of the Supreme King, I will grant the people of the world equal relief. Wu Ming slowly chanted the spirit of words until the Aziz Dakaha clone at the front was extremely close to Wu Ming. The spirit of words had just finished chanting. In an instant, an ocean-like wave surged out of nowhere from Wu Ming's back, washing away all of Aziz Dakaha's doppelgangers and a large amount of black mud. In an instant, the flood erupted. The flood that submerged the entire outer gate of 54,545 caused Aziz Dakaha to raise his height. He was clearly surprised by Wu Ming's move. Without stopping, Wu Ming extended his left hand and continued to chant other spirit of words. Thou hast violated the contract and brought sin to the world. Lord's day, sinners shall be punished. Crush their backs, dig out their bones, hair, and brains, and trample on their blood and mud. If I am the one who cannot approach the darkness, I will follow the words of the Lord and destroy thee. The flood changed color and turned black. At the same time, the flood also changed in nature. The black mud was being eroded by the flood that was mixed with twice the original power. It was quite shocking. But just the combination of the flood and annihilation avatars was not enough to have a serious effect on the black mud. And because of the mutual restraint, the black mud was also slowly devouring the black flood that submerged the outer gate of 54,545. I didn't expect you to have such a trump card. Aziz Dakaha praised Wu Ming. Whether it was the flood or annihilation avatars, Aziz Dakaha didn't know about them. Or rather, Wu Ming deliberately didn't use them in order to catch him off guard. But this alone isn't enough. Aziz Dakaha seemed to be mocking Wu Ming. The shadow wings on his back suddenly spread out, and a large amount of black mud seemed to be recreated. It swarmed out from Aziz Dakaha's back and increased the amount of black mud. It also accelerated the rate at which the black mud was eroding the Black Sea. But what surprised Aziz Dakaha even more was what came next. Lightning. 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 I am the conqueror who can defeat 1,000 with white, 10,000 with 1,000, and 10,000 with 10,000. Now, for me who stands on the side of justice, please shine brightly and bestow me with divine power. Reaching out his right hand, Wu Ming chanted a new incantation. Countless thunderbolts mixed into the black flood. The black flood with thunderbolts was temporarily on par with the replenished black mud. At this moment, Wu Ming's two outstretched hands suddenly clasped together. I am the one who will crush all enemies and enmity between humans and demons. Suddenly, Wu Ming adjusted the Thunder God avatar to the maximum output. Suddenly, the area contained by the Black Sea, or rather, the entire outer door of the 54545 division, was filled with thunderbolts. The Black Sea instantly became a sea of thunderbolts. However, the large amount of thunderbolts didn't spread to the surroundings. Instead, they evaporated the entire Black Sea. The entire Black Sea was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Is his brain damaged? Or is it that he didn't control his moves well? Aziz Dakaha mocked Wu Ming's play of his own attack cancelling out his own attack. But then, Aziz Dakaha realized that something was wrong. Because his entire black mud den was covered in fog. Chapter 863. What are you trying to do? Az Dakaha couldn't help but shout. The black ocean that had been evaporated by the Thunder God's incarnation had now turned into mist and filled the entire black mud cave. Moreover, from the outside, billowing white fog could be seen emerging from the numerous holes in the black mud cave, as if the interior was on fire. The thick fog had indeed attracted the attention of outsiders. "What's that?" someone shouted. Some people noticed the mist that was coming out of the cave. Gradually, the large number of community members surrounding the 54545 barrier put down their work one by one and looked at the devil's den that was emitting thick fog. Many brave people flew into the sky, hoping to observe from a closer distance. Smoke? No, it's mist. Mandela rode a flying dragon into the sky. It would be easier to investigate the mist. After checking the defensive grace that he had prepared, Mandela piloted the wyvern in the direction of the fog to begin his investigation. In the sky not far away, White Yiksha was flying toward them. Because they knew the seriousness of the matter, the outer gates around the 54545 outer gate had been controlled by the North District's hierarchy and sealed off. As a result, White Yiksha could only move to the nearest outer gate that was sealed off and use his own methods to come over. White Yiksha, who had no convenient method, could only fly over. This power. The thick fog also attracted White Yiksha, who had just rushed over. This caused White Yiksha, who was about to land, to give up on his plan. Instead, he headed straight for the devil's den Wu Ming had used, flood, in front of White Yiksha. The mist was very similar to Wu Ming's flood. Or rather, it had the exact same aura. How could it not attract White Yiksha's attention? In the temporary meeting room of the 54545 Outer Gate Alliance, Shadora, who was alone with Vera to discuss the situation, also ran out because of the mist. Vera was the same. "Villo," Vera muttered softly. She jumped and flew up as well. "Wait. Wait a minute, Master Vera." Shadora immediately followed after seeing this. Just as Shadora and Vera flew into the sky, the White Yiksha, who happened to encounter them, issued a warning. "Don't get too close. I'm afraid the mist is corrosive." White Yiksha had witnessed the might of the outer sex sea of annihilation. Absolute Evil's clone had died without a trace. This fog probably had a similar ability. "Lord White Yiksha, have you arrived?" Shadora was rather surprised to see White Yiksha here. "I just arrived not long ago. When I saw the changes here, I immediately rushed over." White Yiksha nodded at Shadora and Vera. "We rushed over because we saw the changes here," Shadora replied. Then, Shadora looked at the temporary base of the community. Taking a closer look, these communities seemed to be very close to the boundary wall. If the corrosive mist were to spread, it would be terrible. Shadora asked. "Lord White Yiksha, do we need to inform the surrounding communities to retreat?" Although she was in the same class as White Yiksha, compared to White Yiksha, there was nothing wrong with Shadora asking White Yiksha whether it was strength or experience. However, Vera answered Shadora instead of White Yiksha. "This is a gift from the Villo. It has the aura of a Villo." Vera meant that there was no need to retreat. Not only that, but Vera also gave White Yiksha the urge to rush in. "Don't act rashly, Vera." Seeing that Vera had such an impulse, White Yiksha said to Vera. Then, White Yiksha turned to Shadora. "Let's get the others to retreat first. After all, I don't know what's going on inside." "Okay, Lord White Yiksha. I'll inform everyone now." But at this moment, a figure fell from the sky. "That's Big Brother Mandela." Shadora was shocked. Why did Mandela fall from the sky all of a sudden? Could it be that he was in danger? Although they didn't know what happened to Mandela, White Yiksha and the others wouldn't watch Mandela fall just like that. Swish! Suddenly, White Yiksha shot out at the speed of a rocket, easily rescuing the fallen Mandela and the wyvern carrying Mandela. Vera and Shadora also flew over one after the other. "Big Brother Mandela!" Shadora yelled and flew to White Yiksha's side. White Yiksha held the unconscious wyvern in one hand and the unconscious Mandela in the other. His expression was rather solemn. No matter if it was the wyvern or Mandela's body, or rather, their skin was filled with burn marks. They must have been accidentally corroded by the spreading mist during the investigation. But don't worry, it's just a severe burn on the skin, White Yiksha said and handed the wyvern and Mandela to Shadora. Perhaps a severe burn on the skin outside the box was a serious injury, but it was only a minor injury inside the box. Moreover, Mandela was a subspecies of the fire dragon and had a certain resistance to fire damage, so Mandela wasn't seriously injured. Shadora, after bringing Mandela back, immediately informed the surrounding communities to retreat by 10 kilometers and pay attention to any changes here. If there's no other way, retreat further. Yes, Sir White Yiksha. Shadora, who was concerned about her brother, nodded immediately and flew down with Mandela and the wyvern. Then, White Yiksha looked at the mist released by the demon's den and said to Vera. It can even burn a subspecies of the fire dragon and it looks like the aftermath. This mist isn't simple, White Yiksha said. Although she knew that Wuming was powerful, Wuming always brought her new surprises. The willow is in danger, Vera said and was about to barge in again. Is this really okay? Perhaps because there were no outsiders, White Yiksha's rather strange words entered Vera's ears. Although the willow isn't safe, it isn't dangerous either. I know that guy better than thou. No matter what, White Yiksha had the advantage over Vera in terms of time and understanding. That guy isn't someone who can be defeated easily, even if the opponent is absolute evil. Otherwise, Wuming wouldn't have been able to create such a huge commotion after fighting with Az Dakaha for a day. Although that was the case, it wasn't a reason to stop Vera. Knowing this, White Yiksha immediately flew in front of Vera and spoke again. Who knows, it might be a crucial moment now. If thou barge in, it might ruin the Willow's plan. Ugh! Vera was instantly embarrassed. It had to be said that this was exactly what Vera wanted. Indeed, after all, Wuming and Az Dakaha had been fighting inside for a day. What if it was a crucial moment now and Vera suddenly barged in and disrupted it? It's better for us to stay on the periphery and observe the situation. However, at this moment, a heatwave that distorted space shot out from a corner of the demon's den and crashed into the boundary wall, causing a shocking explosion. Chapter 864. The timeline jumped forward a few minutes. The fog created by Wuming's thunder god avatar had yet to spread outside. A large amount of fog was concentrated in the devil's den, which was not very permeable, and would not dissipate in a short time. First, the fog corroded the interior of the devil's den, and the interior of the devil's den was completely filled with black mud. Hiss! When the fog came into contact with the black mud, there was the sound of something being corroded. The corroded black mud had no choice but to passively endure it because the fog was too small. Unless the black mud filled the entire devil's den, it would not be able to do anything. What is this? Az Dakaha recognized the nature of the mist. Az Dakaha was surprised to see the true nature of the fog. It was a black sea of gas molecules, and these molecules carried the power of flood and annihilation. It was this power that was constantly corroding the black mud. However, as these gas molecules corroded the black mud, the fog molecules themselves were also dying. After all, the black mud also had the ability to corrode. When the gas molecules corroded the black mud, they would also be corroded by the black mud. It could be said that even if the black mud could only passively endure it, it would not suffer much. However, these gas molecules were originally sacrificial pawns. Their purpose was to provide cover for Wuming, so it did not matter if they were used up. Since it was to provide cover, Wuming naturally had plans to do something. As an existence with a similar mind, Az Dakaha would not just wait for Wuming to continue. Don't even think about it. No matter what Wuming wanted to do, Az Dakaha would not let Wuming have his way. As he spoke, Az Dakaha opened his mouth. The inside of his mouth was also covered in black mud. It was so dark that no one could tell what it originally looked like. Only his black fangs were as sharp as ever. In this pitch-black mouth, flashes of flames suddenly appeared between the fangs and moved restlessly. In an instant, Wu Ming, who was hidden in the fog, could clearly feel that the world had begun to shake. Legend had it that the three-headed mystic dragon was a human king who was guided by the evil god of the sect of fire, Angola Manuel. Before he was defeated, he had destroyed a third of the world. This inheritance that destroyed a third of the world became Aziz Dakaha's gift in the box court world. It was also known as the strongest gift of the lightning series, the Kvarina of the hegemon's halo. At this moment, the radiance of the Kvarina that Az Dakaha spoke of gradually solidified. During this process, a trace of black aura climbed onto the radiance and dyed the Kvarina black. Without a doubt, it was the source of black mud. No matter what you want to do, I will kill you before you complete it. Az Dakaha was prepared to use the Kvarina mixed with the source of black mud to completely eliminate Wu Ming. With that, Az Dakaha spat out the Kvarina, which had been strengthened by the black origin soil, towards the ground. An ominous wave of extreme heat shot out from Az Dakaha's mouth. It was a heat that could melt steel in an instant. Then, an extremely strange scene occurred. A heat ray more than 10 meters in diameter shot out from the 3-meter-tall Az Dakaha's mouth. Under Az Dakaha's control, it shot straight towards Wu Ming's position, or rather, the position before the fog covered Wu Ming's figure. The fog that came into contact with the heat ray disappeared in an instant, and the fog near the heat ray evaporated completely. In the end, the heat ray hit Wu Ming's position and caused a violent explosion. Not only that, but the Kvarina continued to be released. In the end, the black mud cave was penetrated, and the Kvarina was spat out by Az Dakaha. But at this moment, Wu Ming's voice entered Az Dakaha's ears. Az Dakaha was sure that Wu Ming was behind him. In other words, Wu Ming had dodged Az Dakaha's prize technique. Perhaps it was the interference of the corrosive fog that caused Az Dakaha's perception to drop for a moment, so he didn't notice Wu Ming's movement. As for Wu Ming, he had already started chanting the words of the Phoenix incarnation when the fog had covered his body. He arrived behind Az Dakaha. However, before Az Dakaha could get angry, a feeling of surprise rushed to his mind. For victory, quickly come before me. Undying sun, please bestow upon me a shining steed. The demonic whisper entered Az Dakaha's ears, and at the same time, Az Dakaha could feel a wave of heat spreading from his back. Immediately after, another sentence of strengthened words came out. Spirited steed, I, the lifeblood of the dragon of origin, bestow the eternal glory. Bring me the shining wool that symbolizes me. The heat was mixed with the aura of a large amount of origin power. It was certain that Wu Ming was behind Az Dakaha, and he was very close. But soon after, Az Dakaha had doubts. He couldn't possibly have so much origin power, right? But what was certain was that if Az Dakaha was hit by this move, there was a high possibility that he would be killed, ignoring the rules of the box court. It was a huge crisis. But Az Dakaha wouldn't just sit there and wait for death. If Silent Wonder's attack hit Aziz Dakaha, then Aziz Dakaha might be able to insta-kill him. However, at such a close distance, if Silent Wonder was hit by Kvarina's will of hegemony, the Kvarina in his mouth, which had yet to be completely extinguished, once again ignited with a black light. Aziz Dakaha abruptly turned his body and shot it out. A heat ray that was several meters long instantly covered everything in front of Az Dakaha. Although the Kvarina's power and range weren't as strong as before because it wasn't charged, Az Dakaha didn't think that Wu Ming could withstand this attack. Where are you attacking, Az Dakaha? Wu Ming's figure appeared as he spoke. And Wu Ming's current position was right next to the heat ray that hadn't ended yet. Az Dakaha was right. Wu Ming couldn't withstand the Kvarina mixed with black mud, but if Az-Dakaha couldn't hit Wu Ming, it would be a different matter. It could be said that if Az-Dakaha had released the Kvarina, Wu Ming would have died without a doubt. But Az-Dakaha had missed. How is this possible? Az-Dakaha's pitch-black pupils dilated a little. Clearly, he didn't believe that he had made a mistake. Chapter 865. At such a close distance, how could the three-headed demonic dragon, Az-Dakaha, who was the ultimate evil god of the sect of fire, make a mistake? In Az-Dakaha's perception, Wu Ming was clearly behind him. How could he have shifted his position? How could Az-Dakaha's Kvarina just miss Wu Ming by a hair's breadth? Whoosh! A few gusts of wind blew past Az-Dakaha's face. The fog that was slowly dissipating due to the heat rays was also accelerated by the gusts of wind, causing it to dissipate even faster. The multiple layers of wind will refract light. The principle of light refraction was simple. It was nothing more than the refraction of light through different media at different speeds. Az-Dakaha's guess was right. Wu Ming had used the storm incarnation to control the wind, allowing the multiple layers of wind to refract light. This caused Az-Dakaha's Kvarina to shift a little bit. As for how to do it, Wu Ming referred to Altoria's Wind King barrier. As the closest person to Altoria, Wu Ming was very familiar with everything about Altoria, including the Wind King barrier that Merlin had designed for Altoria to hide Excalibur. Altoria's Wind King barrier was not so much a noble artifact as it was a special magic trick. The principle was simple. It simply used the multiple layers of wind attached to the holy sword to change the refractive index of light to achieve the effect of hiding the sword, preventing the opponent from obtaining information about the weapon. However, the Wind King barrier could only achieve the effect of hiding and not refracting. It could not shift Wu Ming's figure, and it was even more difficult to shift Kvarina, which was mixed with black origin soil. However, with other assistance, there would be no problem. The fog that filled the Devil's Den was the product of Wu Ming's thunder incarnation to change the form of flood and annihilation. Naturally, it was also Wu Ming's authority. Thus, it was relatively easy to control. The mist itself was a thin layer of water, but Wu Ming's mist was an even thinner existence. As everyone knew, water could be refracted. Fog's refraction effect was weaker than water's, but it could still do the same. Whether it was the fog that seemed to be blown away when Az-Dakaha used Kvarina, or the fog that combined with wind to shift Wu Ming's position, it was all done by Wu Ming. However, a simple refraction of light could not make Az-Dakaha fall for Wu Ming's trick. Putting aside Az-Dakaha's three-digit strength, Az-Dakaha was also considered a wise man. He was not stupid to that extent. Therefore, relying only on storm, flood, and annihilation was still insufficient. In the end, Wu Ming activated the rarely used magician incarnation. When the magician incarnation that could perform the miracles of the gods, the storm incarnation that brought with it multiple layers of wind, and the flood incarnation and the annihilation incarnation that were affected by the thunder god incarnation, the combination of these three brought about a trick that fooled Az-Dakaha. The wind covered Wu Ming's figure, and the fog refracted Wu Ming's figure. The god's miracle transformed the two into something that could even deceive the evil god, the ultimate illusion. As Wu Ming spoke, he raised his head and looked at Az-Dakaha with a pair of golden eyes. Wu Ming was not good at illusions, but that did not mean he did not know how to use them. Back in Britain, Wu Ming was influenced by Merlin's powerful illusions. He had a lot of experience in illusions, and today, it came in handy. Although Wu Ming did not put much effort into illusions, but with the combination of multiple powers, he finally achieved an ultimate illusion that could even deceive the gods. Az-Dakaha's mistake was the best proof of Wu Ming's illusion. Just a trick to fool people. How dare you keep me in the dark? Az-Dakaha was enraged. If Wu Ming could defeat him in a head-on battle, he would be convinced and would not be angry. After all, Wu Ming was the root dragon. Even if he was defeated by Wu Ming, there was nothing to be ashamed of. But Wu Ming had used a trick like illusions to get behind him. Putting aside the issue of identity, Aziz Dakaha was a three-headed demonic dragon who had mastered thousands of magic spells. It was a great humiliation that he was blinded by illusions. However, Aziz Dakaha did not need to worry about anger. He had no time to dodge. What he needed to think about now was how to deal with Wu Ming's sun that had been compressed to the size of a palm and was about to explode. The heat that he had sensed at the beginning was coming from this sun. Checkmate, Aziz Dakaha. With Wu Ming's smile, Aziz Dakaha was covered in the light of the sun. Outside the Devil's Den, the members of the community who had formed an alliance around the realm wall were terrified. After Shadora conveyed White Yiksha's instructions, they began to retreat. The huge heat ray that had pierced through the Devil's Den had destroyed a large piece of the realm wall. The aftermath of the explosion had affected many people. Although no one was killed, many were injured. Although the realm wall was not so strong that nothing could destroy it, it was not so easily destroyed. As a huge barrier that divided the community, the quality of the realm wall was naturally guaranteed. Not to mention, there was the existence of the realm gate on the realm wall, which increased the quality of the realm wall to another level. However, it was the strange heat ray that had shot out from the Devil's Den that had easily destroyed the realm wall. However, they could not be sure who had launched the attack just now. Was it absolute evil? Or was it a hero who was fighting absolute evil? However, they could be sure that it was absolute evil or the hero who was fighting absolute evil. No matter who had launched the terrifying attack just now, the other person who could fight with the opponent for a day could be said to be a formidable expert. If these people had only taken the incident of the 54545 outer gate being submerged in black mud seriously before, they were now terrified. This was also why they had started to retreat without hesitation when they learned that White Yiksha had signaled for everyone to retreat. After all, this was something that could not be helped. A member of the community in the retreating team would occasionally look at the pitch-black Devil's Den behind them. If there was another heat ray like the one just now and it hit them, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was better to retreat for a while first. Then, he looked at White Yiksha and Vera who were floating in the sky and sighed in relief. Now, the ruler of the East Burrow, White Yiksha, and the most powerful demon in the North Burrow, Vera, were covering for their retreat. Even if there was another attack like the one just now, there was nothing to be afraid of. Reality proved that this person was overthinking. White Yiksha and Vera were indeed covering for their retreat, but the two of them still had lingering fears from the attack just now. That was absolute evil's move. Chapter 866. White Yiksha's expression was extremely serious. He was absolutely certain that it was absolute evil Azi Dakaha's move. The strongest gift of the flash element, Farina, was formed from the inheritance that destroyed 1/3 of the world. Villo will be fine. Although Vera comforted herself, she was still worried about Wu Ming. Since Vera was already like this, White Yiksha was naturally not any better. Even if she retrieved the spirit core, she might not be able to deal with absolute evil. If it's really the end. However, before White Yiksha could finish speaking, the entire Devil's Den instantly turned red as if it was burning from the inside. Sensing the danger, White Yiksha immediately retreated. Then, a blazing pillar of fire shot up into the sky. The entire sky was dyed red, and space began to distort from the heat of the pillar of fire. This is the flames of the sun. White Yiksha raised a hand and covered half of his face. The eruption of the pillar of fire caused a violent gale. The gale seemed to be blowing away the air, sweeping away some of the surrounding teams that had yet to completely retreat. Everyone felt suffocated for more than 10 seconds. After withstanding the strong wind with great difficulty, what came next was the extreme heat. The realm wall began to slowly melt, and part of the land outside the realm wall directly turned into magma. Among the alliance members who had yet to completely retreat, many things, such as tents, paper, and human hair, were directly ignited by the heat of the pillar of fire. Even many people's clothes were burning. Even Shadora and the others with the fire dragon bloodline could not withstand the heat. The sweat that they had just excreted immediately evaporated, and their bodies also felt a severe lack of water. Some ordinary people did not even sweat and directly fainted. Some special races were also affected. For example, the body of Aisha Ignafartes, who came to volunteer as support, even fluctuated as if she was about to die. Jack was so scared that he immediately used his body to protect Aisha. It could be said that if White Yiksha had not asked the alliance members to start retreating, many people would have directly evaporated because of the pillar of fire that pierced through the entire black mud Denver. After all, the black mud cave covered the entire outer sect of the 54545. Although it was inconceivable, the fire pillars also covered the entire outer sect of the 54545. At such a close distance, White Yiksha could completely determine that the fire pillar in front of him had such an ability. Immediately following that, White Yiksha's expression changed because she realized that the pillar of fire had no intention of stopping. It was even accelerating the pillar of fire towards the sky. Not good. Seeing this scene, White Yiksha turned pale with fright. If a pillar of fire with such a range and power rushed into the sky, it would definitely smash a huge hole in the sky surrounding the box court. It might even affect a very large area of the box court curtain. This would definitely have a very serious impact on the box court. At that time, something would definitely happen to some of the races protected by the box curtain. For example, the vampires, who couldn't face the sun directly, would suddenly burn to death under the dangerous sunlight. However, someone was a step faster than White Yiksha. Swish! Vera rushed into the sky at an extremely fast speed like a hot knife through butter. It looked like Vera was prepared to block the powerful pillar of fire that rose from the ground by herself. Vera! White Yiksha cursed inwardly and immediately flew up. This pillar of fire was no trivial matter. Ignoring the range of effects, its power wasn't something that could be casually blocked. But so what? Didn't she need to block it if she couldn't block it? The answer was naturally no. White Yiksha was only complaining that Vera was prepared to take the risk alone. There was no other meaning. Therefore, White Yiksha immediately caught up to Vera. Vera, look at how quiet you are. Why are you always so impulsive? White Yiksha said to Vera as he flew at top speed. Because they will be in danger, Vera simply replied. Was it because she was a child of the community? White Yiksha glanced at the tiny people on the ground. Although direct sunlight was harmful to ghosts, it wasn't fatal. Vera didn't have to be so anxious, right? If Vera was really so responsible, the position of the North District's ruler would have been hers long ago. There must be other reasons. There's a Villos aura in the pillar of fire. I have to help him resolve it before he makes a mistake. Vera meant that the Villo was the one who set the fire. As expected, it was for Wuming. White Yiksha immediately made a helpless expression. No matter what, this pillar of fire can't shatter the curtains of the box court. Otherwise, it will be troublesome. White Yiksha corrected his expression. I don't have any defense-type gifts. It's too late to summon astral beasts. Vera, do you have any good ideas? To be honest, if you asked White Yiksha to destroy a city and commit murder and arson, she wouldn't have any problems. However, when it came to protection and defense, she really had shortcomings. Furthermore, she had yet to retrieve her spirit core, so she was even more of a dabbler. White Yiksha had also exposed this shortcoming during the Absolute Evil clone surprise attack. Of course, this couldn't be blamed on White Yiksha. Everyone had their shortcomings. Furthermore, who asked White Yiksha to encounter such perverted crises time and time again? To deal with the doppelgangers of Absolute Evil, not to mention White Yiksha herself, even her sworn enemy would have to put in some effort to annihilate all of them. Of course, if White Yiksha could retrieve the spirit core, she could also do it. If it was a normal attack, White Yiksha would naturally be able to defend against it. However, the pillar of fire this time was clearly not a normal attack. It looked like a fatal blow that Wu Ming had delivered to Az Dakaha. Regardless of whether Az Dakaha could block it, she, White Yiksha, had no way of blocking it for a while. Realm Gate. No. Vera's first thought was to use the Realm Gate to move the pillar of fire away. However, there was another Realm Gate on the other side of the Realm Gate. That might affect others. If it doesn't work, I can only release an equally powerful attack from the opposite direction to cancel it out. Although this method would cause a vertical explosion in the end, it might. No, looking at the range of the pillar of fire, the explosion would definitely affect some of the surrounding outer buildings. However, it was still much better than the curtain of the box being broken. In that case, I'll use the power of death to eliminate it. As a great devil born between life and death, Vera naturally controlled the power of death. Moreover, this would not cause an explosion. Vera's expression froze. She increased her flying speed and rushed directly to the top of the pillar of fire. Vera waved her hand. A large amount of black death energy filled Vera's surroundings and collided directly with the pillar of fire. It had to be said that this was effective. However, the range was too small. This pillar of fire affected 54,545 outer buildings. Vera could not completely block it. Leave the rest to me. White Yiksha also increased her speed. She was even faster than Vera just now. After all, White Yiksha was once the White Knight King. Vera had blocked many pillars of fire. She had to block the fish that escaped the net, no matter what. At this moment, the pillar of fire suddenly decreased its speed. Furthermore, it was slowly disappearing. This, if one were to ask White Yiksha when she was the most aggrieved, she would definitely answer that there was no time more aggrieved than now. Chapter 867. When Wu Ming released the sun, he chanted 2 lines of incantations in a row, which made the sun incarnation double in strength. Not only that, when Wu Ming used storm, annihilation, flood, thunder god, phoenix, sun, and magician, the power of the 7 incarnations accumulated was all stuffed into the sun incarnation by Wu Ming. This not only increased the sun to the point where it could cause fatal damage to Aziz Dakaha, but also increased the range of the sun incarnation to the extreme. Moreover, the black mud was simply the best fuel for the fire of the sun that was mixed with the power of the source. Therefore, it was precisely because of this, as well as the support of the power of the source, that the pillar of fire that broke out from the black mud cave could spread throughout the entire outer sect of the 54545, burning the black mud of the outer sect of the 54545 to nothing. However, Wu Ming was not a reckless person. After the explosion, the pillar of fire formed by the flames was released towards the sky. This was done by Wu Ming to prevent the explosion from spreading to the people or things nearby. It could be said that if Wu Ming allowed the sun to explode at will, then even if the people of the alliance retreated to a certain distance, they would still be directly vaporized. After all, this was the fire of the sun that burned the entire outer sect of the 54545, and more importantly, the surrounding outer sect might also be affected by the flames. However, if the pillar of fire were to explode towards the sky, it would not spread to the people or things around, but if the pillar of fire were to be allowed to soar into the sky, the curtain of the box would definitely be shattered. Therefore, Wu Ming added the power of annihilation to the sun. When the sun erupted to a certain extent, annihilation would be activated and cut the pillar of fire in the middle. As everyone knew, the pillar of fire was not a pillar, but a pillar-like object formed by the continuous eruption of flames. If it was cut in the middle, the first half of the pillar of fire would dissipate, and the remaining power of the second half of the pillar of fire would not be enough to pierce through the curtain of the box. It would not even reach that height. Wu Ming used this to prevent the pillar of fire from piercing through the curtain of the box. Moreover, there was a long distance between the curtains of the box and the ground, which allowed the pillar of fire to erupt for some distance. Once the fire had weakened, annihilation, which had finished its countdown, would cut off the pillar of fire. After all, if he used annihilation to annihilate the pillar of fire from the beginning, it was likely that it would not succeed. After all, the power of the sun at this moment was far greater than the power of annihilation. He could only wait for the pillar of fire to weaken before cutting it in the middle to achieve the desired effect. It turned out that Wu Ming was right. After the pillar of fire was cut in the middle, the first half quickly dissipated, and the remaining half of the pillar of fire began to slowly dissipate due to the lack of momentum. Although White Yiksha and Vera didn't know what had happened, they were certain that it was Wu Ming's doing. He didn't need anyone to clean up his mess for him. He could handle it alone. What a headache. I got a big fright. White Yiksha sighed helplessly, as if he was relieved of his burden. It could be said that Wu Ming had once again refreshed White Yiksha's worldview. In short, the crisis of the box's curtains shattering had been resolved. However, this crisis was really child's play compared to the crisis of absolute evil. I wonder how absolute evil is doing. With this in mind, White Yiksha looked down. She wanted to see how absolute evil was doing. Clouds floated around White Yiksha, and at the same time, there were many white clouds that blocked White Yiksha's line of sight. It was obvious how high her current position was. If she was outside the box, it would be a life-threatening height for ordinary humans, but it wasn't considered high in the world of the box. It wasn't considered high for White Yiksha either. With White Yiksha's powerful eyesight, she could still see the ground clearly. Although she couldn't see everything clearly, it was almost there. The entire outer gate of the 54545 division had completely sunk into a basin-like structure because this part of the land had completely evaporated. However, at this moment, the basin was not completely dry. Instead, it was filled with red magma. This magma was formed from the magma that had not directly evaporated. It filled the entire basin the size of the 54545 outer gate. Even the realm wall surrounding the outer door of 54,545 had stopped melting after half of it had melted because of the dissipation of the fire pillar. This extraordinary sun flame is actually able to easily melt the barrier of cultivation. If White Yiksha retrieved the spirit spark to recover her strength, she could also use the power of the sun to melt the realm wall, but she couldn't melt the realm wall so quickly. It was still the same sentence. As a separation area, the realm wall that carried the realm door wasn't easily destroyed. Only Az Dakaha, who had fused with the black soil, and Wu Ming, who had the power of origin, could destroy the realm wall so easily. White Yiksha didn't know much about absolute evil, but she had been in contact with Wu Ming for so long, but she never expected Wu Ming to have such strength. White Yiksha was now more and more interested in Wu Ming's identity. Vera, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said and flew straight down. Vera's figure blew away the clouds, allowing White Yiksha to see the full picture of the ground. White Yiksha focused her eyes. It seemed like there was someone in the magma. Although she couldn't see clearly in the magma, it should be Wu Ming if nothing unexpected happened. What about absolute evil? White Yiksha suddenly realized this problem. With a trace of worry, White Yiksha suddenly swooped down and followed Vera. The person in the magma was indeed Wu Ming, but he was motionless at this moment. Other than his shoulders and head floating above the magma, the rest of his body was soaked in the magma. Moreover, a large number of cracks had appeared all over Wu Ming's body. Specks of blue magic power particles were emitted from the cracks, and he allowed the magma to cause secondary damage to the spirit base. His current appearance was not caused by the explosion of the sun incarnation, but the collapse of the spirit base due to overload. Before, he forcibly used 7 incarnations at the same time, and several of them were directly at the maximum output. Although this spirit base was adjusted to the top of the servant spirit base by Wu Ming, it still couldn't withstand the use of 7 incarnations at the same time. If it's the original body, it should be no problem at all, Wu Ming said weakly. If it was the original body, let alone 7 incarnations at the same time, even 12 incarnations at the same time wouldn't be a problem. Wu Ming had a deep understanding of the strength of his body. Although he was trying to be brave by using his incarnation on this spirit base, he had now achieved his goal. Wu Ming under the magma couldn't help but clench his hand. Suddenly, a sweet voice came from the sky into Wu Ming's ears. Villo. Wu Ming subconsciously looked up. It turned out to be Vera. Are you okay, Villo? Flying above the magma, Vera looked at Wu Ming, who was soaked in the magma, and felt a little distressed. It's all my fault. I'm sorry. Vera apologized to Wu Ming with shame. If Wu Ming didn't help her deal with Maxwell, this wouldn't have happened. However, Wu Ming shook his head. Don't blame yourself, Vera. Nothing happened to me. Or rather, it was as Wu Ming wished. As for why, at this moment, White Yiksha also came above the magma and asked Wu Ming nervously. Villo. Where is absolute evil now? As if responding to White Yiksha's words, there was a surge under the magma at this moment. Chapter 868. The reason why White Yiksha asked Wu Ming about Az Dakaha's whereabouts was because he knew that absolute evil could not be killed. Or rather, absolute evil could not be killed by Wu Ming, who was not human. The final trial of humans could only be passed by humans. Even if they really had the strength to crush absolute evil and kill it, absolute evil would revive again. That was the rule of the box court. White Yiksha did not know that Wu Ming could ignore the rules of the box court and kill absolute evil. That was why he was so anxious. After all, if absolute evil was still alive, then it must be like Wu Ming, staying in this magma lake. That was indeed the case. The entire magma lake began to fluctuate bit by bit as if something was about to be released. Slowly, the entire magma lake began to shake violently. So it's still alive. Wu Ming, on the other hand, had an, as expected, expression. It seemed like he knew that Az Dakaha had not been killed by him. After all, absolute evil can only be passed by humans. As a spirit, you naturally can't kill absolute evil. As White Yiksha spoke, he slowly landed beside Wu Ming and prepared to pull him up and take him away. Because it seemed like absolute evil would not immediately appear from the magma lake, they still had time to retreat. Vera also came to Wu Ming's other side and prepared to cooperate with White Yiksha to rescue Wu Ming from the magma lake. Don't worry about me. This body is about to shatter. Leave first. Wu Ming shook his head and rejected their help. But my community also has a way to heal a spirit's body. Vera said pitifully. Vera did not want Wu Ming to leave just like that. If a hero who stopped absolute evil is sacrificed like this, it will be a huge blow to our morale, White Yiksha added. Moreover, the Alliance had already suffered a large number of casualties because of the fire pillars created by Wu Ming. If their morale dropped further, they would be completely finished. Wu Ming could not help but smile, then shook his head. I have no intention of sacrificing myself. Trust me. Although Wu Ming's tone was as weak as if he was about to pass away, his eyes were still full of vigor, and even a little happy. White Yiksha and Vera were rather puzzled. They looked at each other, attempting to find out what Wu Ming was talking about from each other. However, neither of them understood what Wu Ming meant. Do you guys believe me? If you do, then leave this place for now. Absolute evil will definitely fall into my hands today. Vera trusted Wu Ming unconditionally, but not White Yiksha. It wasn't that he didn't trust him, but that he didn't dare to take the risk. Wu Ming looked like he was seriously injured. If absolute evil killed Wu Ming, it would not only be a matter of morale, but there would also be no one here who could restrain absolute evil. Therefore, White Yiksha felt that it was best to retreat first. Otherwise, she could return the divine spark, retrieve the spirit core, and recover her former strength. In the worst-case scenario, White Yiksha could still use his final ability, "Let me retrieve the spirit core, there's no need." Wu Ming instantly interrupted White Yiksha. "Didn't I say that as long as I'm here, you just have to stay in the lower level?" Although Wu Ming did not know if White Yiksha had any means to deal with Az Dakaha, White Yiksha's expression just now was more like she wanted to perish together with Az Dakaha. After all, White Yiksha was Wu Ming's friend. If it was someone else who wanted to perish together with absolute evil, Wu Ming might hesitate, but if it was a friend he knew who wanted to perish together with the enemy, Wu Ming would definitely be the first to object. Vera floated aside at a loss and did not speak. She just quietly watched the two of them talk. However, because the magma lake was shaking more and more violently, Vera also showed a hint of anxiety. White Yiksha, who also noticed this, was silent for a few seconds before finally sighing helplessly. "Are you really okay with this?" White Yiksha looked at Wu Ming's eyes very seriously. Wu Ming also responded with seriousness. "Trust me." In the end, White Yiksha compromised and retreated with Vera. After White Yiksha and Vera retreated, Wu Ming looked at the magma lake that was becoming more and more agitated. Wu Ming had indeed expected Az Dakaha to still be alive, but it was not because White Yiksha said that the final trial of humans had to be completed by humans. After all, Wu Ming himself was a bug and did not need to care about the rules of the box court. Wu Ming knew that Az Dakaha was still alive mainly because of the information provided by Galji. Galji had said that to kill absolute evil, one had to solve the bestowal contest of the human's final trial. Furthermore, one had to break Aziz Dakaha's shoulders, head, and heart at the same time before killing him. However, because of the black mud at the root, Wu Ming considered these weaknesses useless. Wu Ming's clone had obtained more information about Az Dakaha from Galji in the Nizalic space. Wu Ming had also asked Galji about the universe-like power that had instantly killed one of his clones. Wu Ming also told Galji that Galji had killed one of his clones. Galji was not surprised, perhaps because he had more or less guessed it. However, most importantly, Wu Ming already knew what the another cosmology was. According to Galji, Az Dakaha's another cosmology was called Avesta. Of course, the name was not important. What was important was the ability of Avesta to imitate the opposite of Az Dakaha's own cosmology of Zoroastrianism and the cosmology of mankind that had to be crossed over. It could be used by Az Dakaha in a limited manner and could be used to counteract the gift of the enemy. To put it simply, Az Dakaha's another cosmology allowed him to simulate the blessings of the enemy and use the enemy's blessings to offset the enemy's blessings. It could be said that the more enemies Az Dakaha had, the more he could imitate and the stronger he would become. Moreover, as long as it was not the Zoroastrian or human cosmology, Az Dakaha would not be injured or even killed after activating Avesta. The gods of the Zoroastrian sect could not kill absolute evil, and humans lacked power. Other races such as gods and astrals could not pose a threat to Az Dakaha after activating Avesta. Aziz Dakaha didn't even put a 3-digit number of enemies in his eyes. As for 2-digit numbers, he could only look at them in his eyes. Therefore, Az Dakaha was known as one of the strongest godslayers. Wu Ming felt that it was not an exaggeration to call him one of the strongest in the box. This was also one of the important reasons why White Yiksha felt that Wu Ming could not kill absolute evil. Chapter 869. Wu Ming was neither a fire worship sect deity nor a human. As long as Az Dakaha had the simulated cosmic atlas, it was impossible for Wu Ming to hurt or even defeat him. Wu Ming could ignore the rules of the box and kill Az Dakaha. If the sun, which had condensed the power of 7 avatars, hit the defenseless Az Dakaha, he could definitely kill him. However, Az-Dakaha had the simulated cosmic atlas. If Az-Dakaha had used the power of the simulated cosmic atlas, he might have been able to survive. Perhaps it was a trump card, but Az-Dakaha had never used it. If there was a crisis, Az-Dakaha would definitely use it. And this so-called crisis was just like what happened just now. Not to mention, after fusing with the origin black mud, Az-Dakaha's another cosmology might have undergone some changes. Therefore, Wuming knew that he could not kill Az-Dakaha. In other words, Wuming's goal from the beginning was not to kill Az-Dakaha, but something else. With that thought in mind, Wuming looked at the large whirlpool that had appeared on the magma lake. It was almost time for Az-Dakaha to appear. Walala, like a carp leaping out of the water, Az-Dakaha broke through the magma and flew into the sky. At this moment, Az-Dakaha was still covered in black mud, but the amount of black mud seemed to be much thinner than before. Az-Dakaha's heart seemed to have become transparent. The huge heart kept beating, but other than that, it did not look like he had been soaked in magma, nor did it look like he had been hit by Wuming's sun avatar. But Az-Dakaha knew very well that he was almost killed. If he hadn't activated the another cosmology simulation in time, he wouldn't have been able to save himself. I have to say, my old enemy, I have underestimated you. So, then, Az-Dakaha opened his mouth again, and the black light began to condense. This was the sign of the Kvarina. I have decided to kill you here and now. In the face of the Kvarina, which was right in front of him, Wuming did not show the slightest hint of panic. You can't do it, Az-Dakaha. Although his voice was weak, Wuming had a smile on his face. He did not look like he was about to be killed. Then come and try. The black light in Az-Dakaha's mouth became more solid, and it looked like it was about to explode. Even now, you still haven't noticed. Your heart. Wuming couldn't help but sigh. His sigh wasn't for anything else, but for the fact that Az-Dakaha hadn't discovered something yet. Az-Dakaha thought that Wuming was talking about his heart being exposed, but Az-Dakaha did not take it seriously. It's just my heart that's broken. The rule that you have to break my head, shoulders, and heart to kill me is no longer effective against me with power. Wuming was right. The rule was indeed ineffective against Az-Dakaha. So what if the rule is still there? You have to know that you are about to be killed by me. This time, Wuming did not care. Is that so? Don't you notice that something is missing? Az-Dakaha was stunned. What? After being reminded by Wuming, Az-Dakaha realized what he had lost. Die. Without another word, the enraged Az-Dakaha spat out the Kvarina that had fully materialized from his mouth. The black light of destruction covered Wuming and gradually covered the magma lake in a semicircular shape. It began to spread to the entire 54545 outer gate. A large number of people in the Alliance army who were affected by Wuming's sun pillar of fire fell unconscious. The rest of the people were relieved because of the disappearance of the pillar of fire, but the black light that followed made the people in the Alliance army who had not yet fallen unconscious suck in a breath of cold air again. They had not even seen the face of absolute evil, and they had been almost wiped out by the aftermath of one after another. In any case, after this battle, after experiencing the disaster of absolute evil and the hero fighting against absolute evil, the aftermath of the battle between the two, for these people, this was definitely an indelible memory full of memories. The same was true for White Yiksha. Let alone experiencing it, she could not even see a battle of this level. What is it this time? White Yiksha felt helpless about the black light that gradually covered the entire magma lake. Do you have to attack with such a large range every time? However, White Yiksha also gave up. Anyway, the entire 54,545 outer gate had been reduced to a battlefield, and it was almost destroyed. As long as the remaining people did not have any accidents, it would be fine. But, Vera, Who was with White Yiksha? Muttered Wu Ming's name and looked at the spreading black light. Wu Ming was in the semicircular black light at the moment. Although White Yiksha also believed in Wu Ming, she still could not help but worry. I hope nothing happens. At this point, she could only choose to believe in Wu Ming. White Yiksha now regretted that she had promised Wu Ming not to take back the spirit, but just in case, she still had to prepare. If this black light continued to spread, then she would have to use her own strength. But Wu Ming was right. She just needed to believe in him. The black light seemed to be stuck and suddenly stopped spreading. Then, the black light began to shrink bit by bit. Villow's methods. White Yiksha heaved a sigh of relief. At least Wu Ming did not want them to see that he was about to die. The people from the alliance also heaved a sigh of relief. After all, the danger was temporarily resolved, which meant that they could live a little longer. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the people from the alliance sped up their retreat. As long as there were no major injuries, they carried the injured and ran. You bastards, slow down. Although Mandela had already woken up, his body was still very weak. At this moment, he was being carried away by a few members of Salamandra. Coincidentally, these people were Mandela's trusted aides in Salamandra. But because of the bumpy ride, Mandela's entire body was in pain. I'm fine. Put me down. Where's Shadora? She's the most important person in Salamandra. Although Mandela was burned unconscious by Wu Ming's mist, it was not to the extent that he could not walk on the ground. But at this moment, his hands and feet were held by these trusted aides and he could not use his strength at all. He could only scold these people and ask them to put him down quickly. However, Mandela's scolding was incredible. His trusted aides used all their strength and sped up their retreat. Sir Mandela, we can't slow down. After all, we still don't know if there will be danger later. Yes, Sir Mandela. We were appointed by Lady Shadora to take care of you. Your life is the most important thing to us. Lady Shadora still has other companions by her side. Our mission is to escort Sir Mandela to a safe place. You'd better not talk, Mandela. Be careful not to bite your tongue in the wind. As they spoke, they sped up their legs again. Some of them had even started using the blessing of acceleration. As a result, Mandela was jolted even more severely, to the point where he could no longer speak. At this moment, Mandela could only let out meaningless roars. Oh! However, when his trusted aides heard this roar, they thought that Mandela's old injury had relapsed and sped up again. They thought that when they reached a safe place, they could rest assured and find a doctor to treat Sir Mandela. They completely ignored Mandela's murderous gaze. How sad. Chapter 870. In the magma lake, where Wu Ming and Aziz Dakaha were located. Aziz Dakaha was forced to freeze. Golden chains extended from the lava lake and wrapped around Aziz Dakaha's body, locking him tightly in the air. However, the chains did not lock him in from all directions. Although it was strange, Aziz Dakaha could not move. At the same time, the Kvarina of the hegemon was also locked by Aziz Dakaha. This is. Even though Aziz Dakaha was immobilized by the golden chains, he could still speak. My Kvarina. In his free time, Aziz Dakaha still had the time to marvel at the disappearance of his gift. At this moment, Wu Ming's voice entered Aziz Dakaha's ears. What a pity, Aziz Dakaha. Aziz Dakaha looked down. Wu Ming was still soaked in the lava lake, but the cracks on Wu Ming's body were getting bigger. It looked like he was about to disappear. Is this the power of the origin power? It is indeed powerful, ha ha ha. Aziz Dakaha was not depressed about being captured. Instead, he laughed loudly. There is no choice. If you could realize that everything I did was for my body, you would not have lost. Aziz Dakaha was one of the strongest people in the box court. Moreover, he had the origin black soil. Az-Dakaha had the ability to stop Wuming from finding his body. That's right. Wuming's goal from the very beginning was to find his body. Wuming did not want to cause trouble for Az-Dakaha. He only wanted to find his body after saving Shadora. In the end, Az-Dakaha attacked Wuming. Wuming and Az-Dakaha fought for a day in the Devil's Den just to find out if Wuming's body was in Az-Dakaha's body. After confirming that his body was hidden in the form of a ball of light in Az-Dakaha's heart, Wuming began his plan. He used the fog to cover himself and approached Az-Dakaha at lightning speed. He used a power that even his spirit base could not withstand to attack Az-Dakaha. He wanted to break open the black soil around Az-Dakaha's heart and reveal his heart. Once it was revealed, everything would be easy. At an extremely close distance, Wuming and his body would form a connection. Wuming's consciousness would then be able to return to his body. The moment he returned to his body, Wuming felt that his injuries had healed. The black soil was also expelled from his body. Coincidentally, Wuming's origin power of the Sun Avatar had the power of the origin power of the 7 avatars. The last trace of the black soil was removed from his body. As a result, Wuming was completely liberated. A voice that could not be understood by the box court world sounded from the lava lake. Although it could not be understood, the voice had a strong penetrating power. Not only did the people around the 54,545 outer gate hear it, but the entire North District, the entire box court, from the no name to the upper levels of the box court, it could be said that everyone in the box court heard it. The experts hidden in the box, such as the 3 digits, and even the rare 2 digits, all looked in a certain direction. That direction was the place where the voice came from, the North District's middle outer door of the 54545. Anyone who heard the voice could understand that a powerful existence that they could not afford to offend had come to the box. In the middle of the lava lake of the outer door of the 54545, a huge white figure slowly rose from the lava lake. It was a huge dragon, a dragon that could cover the entire outer door of the 54545. Because of its huge size, this figure only revealed its head, shoulders, and some of its claws. At this moment, Wuming was sitting on the dragon's head, paralyzed. To be honest, after my body was affected by the black mud, it unexpectedly grew a step further. Wuming said as he touched his head. The dragon, on the other hand, had some strange feelings. After all, the dragon was Wuming, another him touching his own head was very strange. Wuming had already mastered the ability to control 2 bodies with one consciousness. After his consciousness entered the main body, the originally abandoned spirit base was once again used by Wuming. However, it was about time for this spirit base to be used. Bang! Like glass shattering, Wuming on the dragon's head instantly shattered, turning into little magic particles and returning to the world. Now, it was time to deal with the problem of Az-Dakaha. I have to say, Az-Dakaha, you are the second strongest person I have ever met, but in the end, you will still be defeated by me. The dragon spoke slowly. Unlike Wuming's youthful voice in the spirit-based state, the dragon's voice sounded somewhat ancient. However, this was his real body, which gave Wuming a strong sense of belonging. At the same time, Wuming raised his dragon claw. Countless golden chains wrapped around the dragon claw, extending down to the bottom of the magma lake and wrapping around Az-Dakaha's claws. That's right, this was the one that had entangled Az-Dakaha, Wuming's heaven's lock, Enkidu, the one that had not evolved before the root had obtained it. The 5 fingers of the dragon claw moved slightly, and Az-Dakaha, who was bound by the heaven lock, could not help but descend and was about to land on the dragon claw. However, Az-Dakaha wasn't going to give up so easily. Activate Avesta. Counteracted in turn, simulate in another cosmology. In an instant, Az-Dakaha once again activated the simulated universe in an attempt to break free from Wuming's control. However, there was a flash of light, and 4 or 5 golden swords instantly pierced Az-Dakaha's body. The simulated universe that had just been activated immediately lost its effect. As for Az-Dakaha's other blessings, they were all sealed by the strengthened golden sword. By the way, as soon as Wuming's consciousness returned to his body, he activated a total of 12 avatars. "What's this?" Az-Dakaha exclaimed in surprise. The golden sword that split the godhead, one of Welaslana's 10 avatars. If one were to say that Velaslana's authority was fused with Mekhal's authority and was modified by Wuming to suit himself, then the golden sword was the only authority that could still see the shadow of Velaslana's authority. It was no wonder that Az-Dakaha was so shocked. He now realized that many of the abilities that Wuming used were similar to Welaslana's avatars. When I killed Welaslana in the other world, I obtained his authority. After fusing and modifying it, it has now become my one and only authority, Wuming explained casually. To think that I would lose to the same move again. This is fate. Az-Dakaha chuckled quietly. However, Az-Dakaha still had some tricks up his sleeve. Pucci, Az-Dakaha's blood vessels seemed to have exploded, and black liquid began to flow out of his body. It was the source of the black mud. Wuming's son had removed the black mud from Wuming's body, but Wuming did not remove the black mud from Az-Dakaha's body, so Az-Dakaha still had the power of the black mud. However, this was also Az-Dakaha's biggest failure. Because mutual restraint means that I can deal more damage to the creature that is possessed by the black mud, Az-Dakaha. Chapter 871. Wuming's formless power of origin continued to flow from his body to his dragon claw. Countless white flames were born. This was the fire of origin produced when the concentration of power of origin reached its peak. It could cause obvious damage to the black mud. The black mud gushing out of Az-Dakaha's body seemed to have met its natural enemy. It was constantly being burned by the flames, and as the black mud erupted from time to time, the flames would also burn fiercely from time to time, increasing the efficiency of the flames. But no matter what, the result would not change. The black mud gushing out of Az-Dakaha's body would inevitably be burned to ashes by the white fire of origin. Not only that, but even the Enkidu that locked Az-Dakaha in the sky was filled with a large amount of power of origin. Roar! Az-Dakaha couldn't help but let out a painful roar. If you didn't use the power of the black mud, you might be able to live a little longer, Wuming said regretfully. Unlike the state of the spirit clone, Wuming's power of origin was beyond imagination. And this endless source of power was the black mud of Az-Dakaha. It could be said that it was the nemesis of the black mud. It was like seeing a fire and trying to extinguish it with straw. The straw would only be burned by the fire. If Az-Dakaha had released all the black mud in his body in his previous state, it would have been easier for Wuming to deal with him. But unfortunately, the black mud on Az-Dakaha's body had been greatly reduced by Wuming's son. But this had no effect on Wuming. Gradually, Az-Dakaha's body turned pure white. That was the original color of Az-Dakaha's body. It seemed that the black mud on Az-Dakaha's body was almost completely burned away. Otherwise, the black mud would have been able to wrap around Az-Dakaha's body. Roar! Az-Dakaha didn't answer Wuming's question because the burning of his origin power was causing him so much pain that he wanted to die. He kept howling. Wuming could understand this kind of pain. When Gidea had detonated the black mud and injured Wuming, Wuming had also experienced this kind of pain. It was not only physical pain, but also mental pain. It was as if there was no solution, and he could only passively endure it. It was as if he was in hell. Although what was being burned was the black mud, Az-Dakaha still felt pain. As long as there was a trace of the black mud left, he would not be able to escape this pain, this extremely fatal pain. I have indeed lost. Az-Dakaha was finally able to speak instead of howling. Perhaps because the black mud had been reduced to a minimum, Az-Dakaha's body had basically turned white. Only a trace of black could be seen on his limbs. Wuming quietly looked at Az-Dakaha and did not interrupt him. Instead, he waited for him to continue speaking. However, after Az-Dakaha finished speaking, he did not speak again. It was as if he had run out of energy and could not speak. Gradually, the black mud completely disappeared. The flames of the origin were also extinguished because of the disappearance of the black mud. Az-Dakaha's dragon body turned from black to pure white. His shadow wings also disappeared. He was now like a three-headed lizard, locked in Wuming's dragon claws by the heavenly lock. Reality proved that the black mud had indeed been completely burned away by the flames of the origin. Under Wuming's command, the celestial lock loosened slightly. The pure white three-headed dragon that was still unable to escape the celestial lock, its four limbs drooped loosely towards the ground. Az-Dakaha's left and right heads also drooped naturally. Only the head in the middle seemed to be struggling helplessly before it slowly lifted its head. Its black and white eyes carefully looked at Wuming. Then, Az-Dakaha spoke. Dragon of origin, this is indeed your victory. However, absolute evil, that you killed will still be born. This is a trial that humans must overcome. As someone who had temporarily become Wuming's kin because of the black mud, Az-Dakaha now clearly understood what the dragon of origin was. At the same time, Az-Dakaha no longer called Wuming an enemy. Because now, he was the final human trial's absolute evil Az-Dakaha without the black mud. He was no longer Wuming's kin. Your identity and status are indeed above the world. However, the world will not completely give in because of your interference. Even if I cannot be resurrected, a new absolute evil will be born for humans to test. As Az-Dakaha spoke, his head in the middle gradually lowered. You don't have to worry about the future. Wuming did not have any ill intentions. He was just stating the truth. As he was about to die, he could not see the future. Ha ha ha. You're right. Being able to let go of everything and enter a deep sleep is not bad, Az-Dakaha laughed as he looked at Wuming. He began to talk to himself. It's a pity that humans did not surpass me. With that, Az-Dakaha's head drooped down, and there was no more movement. He's already gone. Although Az-Dakaha looked like he was asleep, he was indeed dead. At this moment, of the two dragon horns on Wuming's head, the one at the back shone. The light shone on Az-Dakaha's body as if it was scanning him. Then, a cold but slightly emotional female voice entered Wuming's mind. Master, it's confirmed that Az-Dakaha is mentally dead. Thank you for your hard work, Collis. Wuming's voice was filled with emotion. The female voice that appeared in Wuming's mind was Wuming's magic attire. It was an extra sister machine of the same model as Ilia's Ruby and Mayo's Sapphire Lapis Collis Balit. This crown-style magic attire followed Wuming's body to the box garden world. Of course, Enkidu also came with it. After confirming that Az-Dakaha was dead, the heavenly lock around Az-Dakaha's body was dispelled. Then, it wrapped around Silent Dragon's arm and returned to its original position. Thank you for your hard work, little N. Wuming's hard work was indeed related to the two of them helping to deal with absolute evil and checking on absolute evil's death. But more importantly, it was Wuming's gratitude to Enkidu and Collis for protecting his body in the box garden world. He thanked them for protecting him. Chapter 872. What was there to protect? Because Wuming saw it. After all, it was the experience of his original body, so Wuming, who had returned to his body, would naturally see the past experience in an instant. If he had to say something, it could be said that this was the only special vision. At this moment, Wuming slowly closed his eyes, preparing to digest the things he had seen before. The moment Wuming returned to his body, he saw all the experiences of his body in the world of the box court. However, because Az-Dakaha was still in front of him, Wuming did not look at it in detail. Now that Az-Dakaha had been destroyed, Wuming could read it again. Back then, when the box court had just been established, Wuming's body fell from the sky into the box court, and coincidentally, it fell at the location where No Name used to be. At that time, No Name had not yet established a community in that location, and the surrounding area was even a wasteland. Of course, most of the areas in the box court's early days were wastelands, because there were not many people in the box court when it was first established. Especially the outer sect with the lower numbers, it could be said that in the beginning, there were unimaginably few people in the 7-digit outer sect. Similarly, because the box court's early system had not yet been established, the box court could be said to be very chaotic at that time. Wuming, this thing that exuded a powerful aura, also attracted a lot of attention. Many forces and even individuals came to the 7-digit outer sect to investigate, but the result was naturally to no avail. As for why, it was because they could not find any abnormalities. It was because the black origin mud covered up Wuming's aura, and the black origin mud sealed Wuming together with it. At that time, Wuming's consciousness had already returned to the big origin, so naturally, he could not move. However, Wuming's body was still suffering from the corrosion of the black origin mud, so Kalas and Enkidu combined the power of the black origin mud in Wuming's body to create a light membrane. They turned Wuming's body into a ball of light, sealed him together with the black origin mud, and buried him deep underground to prevent the black origin mud from flowing out. The two of them had experienced a lot with Wuming, and had seen the power of the black origin mud. In their opinion, if Wuming had consciousness at that time, he would have made the same choice. The facts prove that this was indeed the case. If Wuming still had consciousness at that time, he would have let the two of them seal the black mud together with his own body if there was no other way, so that the black mud would not leak out. However, in that case, the black origin mud could only continuously corrode Wuming, who was also inside the ball of light. Wuming did not think much of it. After all, his injuries could slowly recover, but those who were injured by the black origin mud would not be healed so easily. This was also one of the reasons why Wuming did not want the black origin mud to flow out. Fortunately, the black origin mud was boundless water and did not have a source. Once it was drained, it would completely disappear. In addition, Wuming's body was constantly producing origin power, so Wuming's body did not suffer too much damage. At most, he would feel a little pain. However, since Wuming's consciousness was not in his body, he naturally could not feel any pain. Therefore, Wuming did not blame Kalas and Enkidu for Wuming's actions. Although this was the case, Kalas and Enkidu had always placed Wuming first. If they did not understand Wuming, the two of them would not have chosen to seal the black origin mud and Wuming's body. Instead, they would have allowed the black origin mud to flow into this world and protect Wuming's body from harm. However, if they did that, Wuming would definitely be furious when he found out about their actions. Therefore, the two of them chose to seal the black origin mud and Wuming's body. However, they did not choose to sacrifice Wuming for the sake of the world. Kalas and Enkidu both understood that if they did that, Wuming's body would continue to be corroded by the black origin mud. Although it would not kill Wuming, it would still cause serious injuries to him in the end. Therefore, after the two of them chose to seal Wuming's body together with the black origin mud, they also chose to take the damage for Wuming. As Wuming's personal belongings, even if the two of them chose the world, they would not give up on Wuming. The true meaning of being Wuming's personal belongings was to have both of them. Within the sphere of light, Enkidu extended his chains to their maximum length, completely wrapping around Wuming's body, while Kalas converted all of her mana into 100% defense, buffing Enkidu and Wuming's bodies. As a result, most of the black origin mud's connection with Wuming was severed. Only a small portion of the black origin mud in Wuming's body was still corroding Wuming's body. However, the endless amount of origin power he produced resisted it, so Wu Ming's body did not suffer much damage. However, Enkidu and Kala suffered greatly. As existences who had followed Wu Ming for a long time, they had also produced a trace of origin power when they were in the origin. It was by relying on this trace of origin power that the two of them were able to resist the corrosion of the black origin mud and protect Wu Ming's body. However, it was precisely because they had origin power that the two of them continuously endured the pain brought about by the black origin mud. By the way, Kalas had used her ability to scan Wu Ming's consciousness and determined that Wu Ming's consciousness had automatically returned to the backup machine in the origin because he could not bear the pain brought about by the black origin mud's explosion. Also, although the explosion had also affected Enkidu and Kalas, the two of them were unexpectedly only slightly affected by the explosion, while Wu Ming seemed to have taken the brunt of the damage caused by the black origin mud. Under the circumstances where they were not injured, the two of them chose to seal the black origin mud and Wu Ming's body, protecting both the world and Wu Ming's body, while quietly waiting for the day when Wu Ming would find his body. It had to be said that Wu Ming was quite angry when he saw this scene. What they did was no different from slow suicide because they could not resist the corrosion of the black origin mud at all. If possible, Wu Ming really hoped that the two of them would have allowed the black origin mud to corrode Wu Ming. Although it was impossible to guarantee that the two of them would not be corroded by the black origin mud, they could have attracted a lot of firepower. Although it was just a guess, it made sense that Wu Ming had attracted the firepower when Gidea detonated the black origin mud. After all, Wu Ming was a good fuel for the black origin mud. Even if he had to take a lot of damage, it would not have been a big deal. After all, Wu Ming's body could produce an endless amount of origin power, so he was not afraid of the black origin mud. At most, he would be seriously injured. Speaking of which, it was really strange. Kalas and Enkidu were willing to sacrifice themselves for Wu Ming, while Wu Ming, who saw this scene, was also willing to let himself attract the firepower. It was really contradictory. However, it was also because of this that the bond between Wu Ming, Kalas, and Enkidu was manifested. It was also because of this that Wu Ming said emotionally to the two of them, "Thank you for your hard work." But in the end, the two of them still survived. Even if Wu Ming's consciousness was not present, he would not just wait for the two of them to suffer continuous damage and slowly die. This was because Enkidu's body, chains, and Kalas's body, crown, were tightly attached to Wu Ming. Because of this, the origin power in Wu Ming's body seamlessly acted as a reinforcement. The origin power was transmitted to the two of them, allowing them to successfully resist the black origin mud and survive until now. Because of the black origin mud, Wu Ming's aura had been concealed very well. Many people who had established a community in the outer sect of 2105380 did not discover any traces of Wu Ming. It seemed that they had completely treated the legend of a mysterious object that had once fallen here as a mere story. Day after day passed. Gradually, Wu Ming completely cleaned out the black origin mud in his body. Kalas and Enkidu also had the support of Wu Ming's origin power to slowly devour the black origin mud. And when the amount of black origin mud decreased to a certain extent, Wu Ming's powerful, mysterious, and noble aura leaked out. As a result, Wu Ming's aura caused the surroundings to change. Chapter 873. At that time, many communities had already been established in the surrounding area. After hearing about this, they all tried to occupy this place, wanting to dig out the gift from the ground and take it for themselves. However, because of the mutual interference, no community was able to occupy this place. Not long after, perhaps Enkidu and Kalas realized this problem. The reduction of the black mud caused Wu Ming's aura to leak out a little. Therefore, the two of them worked together to use the power of the origin in Wu Ming's body to strengthen the seal of the light membrane, causing the leaked aura to disappear. However, even if the aura disappeared, it was too late. The mysterious aura had indeed appeared here before, so it was still debated, and the surrounding communities were still fighting over it. In the past, No Name, who was not far from here, heard about this matter and came over. They took root in this land and put an end to the surrounding community's greed for the powerful gift under this land. At that time, No Name was the ruler of this area, so they had the right to do so. Of course, there were rumors in the outside world that No Name came to be the peacemaker in order to monopolize the mysterious gift in this land. However, No Name did not have such intentions. Even if they did, they would not be able to find the specific location. After all, the seal had been strengthened by Enkidu and Kalas. However, there was no guarantee that there would be a next time when the aura would leak out. No Name, who did not monopolize the mysterious gift, Wuming, once again sealed this land. Although it was called a seal, it was actually just a barrier that isolated them from the outside world. The purpose seemed to be to prevent Wuming's aura from leaking out again. Days passed like this, and Wuming's aura did not leak out again. Some of the surrounding communities also changed dynasties. Simply speaking, this matter had gradually faded away. However, 3 years ago, the Demon King suddenly attacked No Name for unknown reasons. After defeating No Name and taking away almost everything No Name had, the people behind the Demon King dug up Wuming along with the ground and took him away. Even if the other party didn't come for Wuming, they must have planned to kidnap this mysterious gift of Wuming as well. It seemed that the hole that Wuming had seen in No Name that had a trace of his own aura was left behind in this way. After that, perhaps for the sake of research, someone accidentally broke the seal. As one could well imagine, the source of the black mud emerged. Although Wuming couldn't see the other party's face clearly, he knew that they were definitely from the faction behind Galji. Although they also realized that there was something in the black origin mud, the power of the black origin mud might have exceeded their expectations, and they panicked for a moment. But right after that, Wuming, Enkidu, and Kalas all entered a black box, which seemed to be a seal-type gift. This didn't mean that the black root soil was harmless just because Enkidu and Kalas stopped their plan to eliminate it. The black root soil was still very corrosive when it was with something that was filled with the aura of origin power. In short, Wuming was sealed again. However, it seemed that the seal wasn't very effective. The black root soil was constantly corroding the seal, and this was also thanks to Wuming's origin power, eliminating a large amount of the black root soil. If it was the original amount of black root soil, let alone 3 years, the seal would have been broken in less than 3 days. And because they seemed to have fallen into the hands of an unknown enemy, Enkidu and Kalas slowed down or even stopped their work of eliminating the black root soil. They wanted to wait for Wuming to come to this world first. After all, if they completely eliminated the black root soil before Wuming arrived, Wuming's unconscious body would definitely be used by this unknown enemy. As for why, Wuming guessed that the other party was the enemy behind Galji, but Enkidu and Kalas didn't know. However, there was one thing that they were certain of, and that was that the people who attacked No Name and took away Wuming's body were not good people. At the very least, they were already on opposing sides, not to mention that these people were also trying to study Wuming. And the black root soil became an invisible shield, protecting Wuming's body from being studied by the enemy. And without origin power, these people had no good way to break the black root soil, unless they assimilated with the black root soil. However, Wuming felt that they would definitely not choose to do so. As for why, it was just Wuming's intuition towards these people with bad habits. After that, about 3 years had passed. From time to time, some people would open the seal to examine and study it. It seemed that they were not willing to accept the fact that the black root soil was a hot potato, and felt that they had to study it even if they had to burn the skin of their hands. During this period, people or objects would be thrown in from time to time, as if those people were studying the black root soil. However, whenever a third-rate person came in, Enkidu and Kalas would use their origin power to corrode the black root soil, and the stimulated black root soil would corrode the person who came in. It must be known that if the black root soil was accepted by an outsider, it would fuse with that person like a symbiotic entity. If that happened, it would be difficult to deal with, which was why Enkidu and Kallis did this. As for indirectly causing the death of someone, sorry, but this was the right thing to do. First, it could prevent the enemy from studying Wu Ming's body, and prevent the enemy from having the opportunity to study it. Second, it could prevent the black root soil from fusing with an outsider as a parasite, because if an evil person were to coexist with the black root soil, then it would cause a disaster in this world. Thinking about it this way, Enkidu and Kallis could be considered to have contributed to the box garden world. In short, they did not study anything for 3 years. It was unknown whether they were not in a hurry or were not interested, but the number of times they opened the sealed box to experiment on Wu Ming also decreased. Perhaps it was also related to the fact that they did not study anything even once. One day, someone opened the seal on the box and put Wu Ming's body into multiple layers of gift cards. Without the seal effect of the box, the mere gift cards could not resist the corrosion of the black root soil. In the end, the black root soil destroyed all the gift cards, and the black root soil poured into the outside world. At the same time, the black root soil seemed to have broken some kind of seal on the outside world and released a white three-headed dragon. The last thing Wu Ming's body saw was the three-headed dragon absorbing the black root soil, including Wu Ming's body, into its body. The light that Wu Ming's body turned into was right where the three-headed dragon's heart was. Needless to say, this was definitely Galji's doing. He put the unsealed black root soil into the seal of absolute evil. The black root soil, which was also a bug like Wu Ming, easily broke Az Dakaha's seal. Wu Ming already knew the rest, so he didn't need to continue watching. Chapter 874. Kallis, record my memory and make it into a projection. I might need it later. Wu Ming opened his eyes and said to the dragon horn headpiece on his head. Yes, master. Kallis began to read Wu Ming's memory. Without a doubt, Kallis, as a pure support-type magic attire, could definitely do this. Reading Wu Ming's memory was nothing to be surprised about. Wu Ming, who trusted Kallis very much, wouldn't care about this. As for Kallis, who was extremely loyal to Wu Ming, her mission was to perfectly carry out Wu Ming's orders. Then, Wu Ming looked at the golden chain on his dragon arm. Enkidu, are you there? Master Wu Ming, I'm here. Enkidu's elf-like voice entered Wu Ming's mind. Enkidu and Kallis were very similar. They were both existences without bodies. The former lost her body, while the latter didn't have a body to begin with. Both of them were also loyal to Wu Ming and were willing to follow Wu Ming for the rest of their lives. Both of them defined themselves as Wu Ming's tools for Wu Ming to use. Enkidu's actions were even more serious than Kallis. Kallis was an existence similar to an artificial intelligence, so it was natural for her to talk to Wu Ming. On the other hand, Enkidu was a heavenly lock, a chain. What was a chain? It was a weapon, and a weapon didn't need to communicate with its master. Therefore, Enkidu and Wu Ming didn't have much interaction. She wouldn't be jealous of Kallis. After all, Enkidu could speak whenever he wanted to. Wu Ming didn't forbid Enkidu from speaking. It was just that Enkidu didn't want to speak because of his definition of a weapon. However, whenever Wu Ming took the initiative to talk to Enkidu, Enkidu would always respond to Wu Ming enthusiastically. Seeing that Enkidu responded to him, Wu Ming didn't rush to talk to Enkidu. Instead, he continued to call out to Kallis. And Kallis. Master? Kallis asked. After the two of them turned their attention to Wu Ming spoke. This kind of situation won't happen again, I promise you. Wu Ming's tone was full of seriousness. Wu Ming was naturally referring to Enkidu and Kallis, who had followed Wu Ming's body into this world for an unknown period of time. Moreover, they had been protecting Wu Ming's body for such a long time. At that time, due to the unbearable pain caused by the explosion of the black soil, Wu Ming's consciousness directly separated from his body. This was something that couldn't be stopped. Although this wasn't Wu Ming's fault, and Enkidu and Kalas didn't blame Wu Ming couldn't stand it. Last time was my mistake. I promise you, there won't be a next time. What Wu Ming meant was that next time, he would definitely eliminate Gidea completely. He definitely wouldn't let Gidea do it again. Of course, we agree with the idea of eradicating Gaia, but, Kalas paused mid-sentence, and Enkidu continued. You don't have to do this, Master. The two of them meant that Wu Ming didn't have to make a special promise to them. No matter what, I will always be your chief priest, Master Wu Ming. There isn't a priest who doesn't want to stay with the God they believe in. You are my master, and I don't think it's a sad thing to stay with you. Wu Ming couldn't help but laugh in his heart. I was being pretentious. Indeed, with the relationship between Wu Ming, Enkidu, and Kalas, there was no need for him to take care of himself. However, Wu Ming always forgot, or perhaps it was because he valued Wu Ming so much that he forgot. Now, let's deal with the problem of Az-Dakaha. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he looked at his dragon claw. Silent sound hadn't done much damage to Az-Dakaha. All he had done was bind him with the skylock, burn him with the origin fire, and stab him with the gold sword. That shouldn't have been enough to kill Az-Dakaha. In the end, Az-Dakaha died just like that. It was a dramatic scene of, I didn't even do anything and you're already dead. According to what Kalas said, Az-Dakaha died of spiritual causes. Kalas, what do you mean by spiritual death? Wu Ming asked. Master, the spiritual death that I have concluded is the disappearance of the soul. In other words, your physical body is still alive. That was why Az-Dakaha looked like he was asleep. Simply put, his soulless body was not completely dead. Wu Ming guessed that Az-Dakaha's powers had been sealed by the gold sword, which caused his godhead to be low. Afterward, the origin fire burned the black mud in his body and burned his soul away. Although Az-Dakaha's body was still alive, it was only a matter of time before he died. What was important was the words Az-Dakaha left behind before he died. As a Bug, Wu Ming could indeed ignore the rules and forcefully eliminate the trials that humans had to pass if they wanted to survive. However, at the same time, the world would create new trials for humans to pass. For example, your neighbor's parents arranged for your neighbor's child to mow the grass by hand to train him. Coincidentally, you were weeding with a lawnmower. Afterward, you helped the neighbor's child mow the grass. This would be seen by the parents, but because you had good intentions, they would not say anything. However, for the sake of their child, they would still give the child a new training mission. It was the same in the box court world. Wu Ming helped humans eliminate the trials that they had to pass, so the world would rearrange the trials for them. Az-Dakaha, who had the identity of absolute evil in the final trial, was indeed killed by Wu Ming. However, the identity of absolute evil was not killed. The world could pull out another evil god from the myths and let him become absolute evil for humans to pass the trials. This problem needs to be solved, Wu Ming said in a low voice. From the world's point of view, humans, who had become the leader of all things, had to accept the trials to prevent humans from becoming arrogant and destroying the world and themselves. However, from Wu Ming's point of view, even without the trials, humans would not become like that. Wu Ming believed in humans and the infinite possibilities of humans. However, the world was not human. It would not reason with you and would only do things according to the rules. Absolute evil. Wu Ming stared at Az-Dakaha's corpse and pondered. It seemed like he was considering a certain possibility. However, at this moment, within the range of Wu Ming's mental power, two figures flew over from afar. Chapter 875. These two figures were White Yiksha and Vera. Holy White Dragon. White Yiksha slowly reduced her flying speed. The other party's aura gave White Yiksha, who was nervous at the moment, a very dangerous feeling. Right now, she was not the opponent of this dragon that occupied almost the entire magma lake. Not only that, the dragon gave White Yiksha a very unusual feeling. It was as if she was facing the whole world. At the same time, there was a sense of familiarity, as if she had seen it somewhere before. White Yiksha shook her head and stopped thinking about it. The most important thing now was, she had to determine whether this dragon was an enemy or a friend first. "Villo is there," Vera said casually again and rushed over again. "Wait a minute. Vera." White Yiksha felt a headache coming on. Vera was good at everything, but she was a natural airhead, which was quite helpless. In this helplessness, White Yiksha also sped up and flew over with Vera. "White Yiksha, Vera, you're here." Wu Ming saw the two people coming and greeted them. "Thou art a Villo." White Yiksha was shocked. It was not White Yiksha's fault for not recognizing Wu Ming. After all, although the aura of the follower's spiritual base and the aura of the main body were somewhat similar, Wu Ming's main body's aura was more unique. It was like the difference between tofu and stinky tofu. In short, this seemingly dangerous dragon in front of them was one of them. "Vera has become so big." Vera excitedly flew around Wu Ming's big head and said, "Is it very big? I think it's just right." Although Wu Ming did not have much awareness, his body had indeed grown a lot in the box court world. After all, he had fallen into the box court world since the creation of the box court. Although it had not reached hundreds of millions of years, it had been thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, and so on. In short, it could only be more and not less. And such a long time of settling down in exchange for Wu Ming's growth. At this moment, he was not much smaller than the 54545 outer sect. If he spread his wings that had been curled up, he would probably completely surpass this outer sect. As for how big an outer sect was, Wu Ming had no idea. Anyway, the box court world was very big. The diameter of the Earth was about 12,700 kilometers. From the North District to No Name, it would be 980,000 kilometers. Moreover, this was the distance from the North District to No Name. Moreover, Wu Ming's current body size could be freely controlled. Therefore, the size of his body was not very significant. Chi. Really, my heart has been taken care of during this period of time. It had to be said that White Yiksha, who was used to living a peaceful life, was a bit like an old man. Once he was stimulated, his heart would not be good. Just as Wu Ming was thinking this, White Yiksha instantly looked at Wu Ming. She had a nagging feeling that Wu Ming was thinking of something bad. Vera, on the other hand, saved the day. "Villo, are you hurt?" Vera, who had flown to Wu Ming's head, sat down on Wu Ming's head without holding back. "I'm fine. Thanks to Az Dakaha, my body has been found." "Also, Az Dakaha is already dead," Wu Ming said as he lifted Az Dakaha's corpse in his dragon claws. "Back then, I thought that thou must be extraordinary. I didn't expect thy true identity to exceed my expectations." White Yiksha also approached Wu Ming and observed him carefully. At this moment, Az Dakaha was no longer that important. "I have a feeling that I've seen thee somewhere before." Looking at Wu Ming, a sense of familiarity surged in White Yiksha's heart again. However, she just could not recall where she had seen Wu Ming. When White Yiksha said this, Wu Ming had some guesses. According to White Yiksha's experience, White Yiksha had probably existed when Wu Ming had fallen into the box court. White Yiksha at that time should have been called White Night King. Since that was the case, it was not strange that White Night King had sensed Wu Ming's aura. Perhaps my aura had leaked into this world at some point. After all, my identity is very special. Dragon of Origins. White Yiksha suddenly spoke. Wu Ming was shocked. He did not say anything, but White Yiksha had guessed it immediately. Although Wu Ming's expression did not change much and he did not answer White Yiksha's question, it was because of Wu Ming's appearance that White Yiksha was even more certain that her guess was correct. Ma, don't be so surprised. It's not strange that I know about the Dragon of Origins. I'm one of the top 10 in the box court. White Yiksha smiled rather proudly. White Yiksha's words made Wu Ming fall into deep thought. It seemed that from the beginning until now, many people knew about the existence of the Dragon of Origins. Back then, Wu Ming's master, Skaha, had seen through Wu Ming's essence at a glance. Although that was related to Wu Ming's incomplete awakening, many people still recognized Wu Ming's identity later on. Although many knew of Wu Ming's identity because they had come into contact with the Black Origin soil, there were also those who knew of Wu Ming's identity without coming into contact with the Black Origin soil. Without exception, they were all high-level existences, such as gods. Back in the burning Winterwood City, although the twin goddesses' combat strength was very weak, they had seen through Wu Ming's identity just by coming into contact with Wu Ming. They had surrendered because of that. As a star spirit, White Yiksha had also recognized Wu Ming's identity. Perhaps that was the reason. White Yiksha seemed to have seen through Wu Ming's thoughts, so he spoke. It seems that you have something on your mind. After this matter, I have something to say to you. You will definitely like it. It seemed that White Yiksha wanted to discuss the problem of the power of origins with Wu Ming in detail. Wu Ming was naturally eager for this. He still hoped to obtain more information about the Dragon of Origins from an insider. After all, Wu Ming had never seen his own race. Wu Ming's hometown had been found. Now, it was time to find Wu Ming's own race. Now, we have to deal with the problem of absolute evil. As White Yiksha spoke, he landed on Wu Ming's dragon claw and arrived beside Az Dakaha's body that had yet to completely die. If you killed absolute evil, I'm afraid it won't be so easy to deal with, right? White Yiksha turned his head and looked at Wu Ming's big eyes. From the looks of it, White Yiksha also knew that the power of origins was a bug. According to Az Dakaha's last words, a new absolute evil might be born after Az Dakaha's death, but this absolute evil will no longer be Az Dakaha. Although he said that, Wu Ming didn't have a headache at all. It's indeed very difficult. White Yiksha fell into deep thought. She was the same as Wu Ming. She also had a headache over the world's actions. Look at how confident you are. Could it be that you have a good idea? With my strength, even if another absolute evil appears, I can still easily destroy it, Wu Ming replied in a deep voice. Indeed, with Wu Ming's nature of ignoring the box court's rules, all he needed to do was use powerful means to attack the new absolute evil. He didn't need to care about the restrictions brought about by absolute evil's identity. But that way, a new absolute evil will definitely be born, right? White Yiksha shook his head and denied it. That's why I'm not prepared to do that. Wu Ming shook his head. I have a better idea. Chapter 876. However, at that moment, Vera, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. Villo, isn't it hot to stay in here all the time? Vera asked in concern as she tilted her head. After hearing Vera's words, Wu Ming also realized this point. It's not hot, but I still have to thank Vera for her concern. As the magma didn't cause much damage to Wu Ming, well, basically no damage, Wu Ming subconsciously ignored this point. To Wu Ming, soaking in the magma was like soaking in a hot spring that wasn't too hot. It wasn't very comfortable, but it was at least warm. Speaking of which, it's indeed inconvenient to talk to you like this. After Wu Ming said that, his body emitted light as his dragon body transformed into a blob of light that instantly shrank. When the light dissipated, Wu Ming and his human form floated in the air with Vera in his arms and appeared in front of White Yiksha. He still had black hair and red eyes. There weren't any major changes. Where's Absolute Evil's corpse? White Yiksha asked. How could such a large human in the final trial be gone in an instant? I've placed AZ Dakaha's corpse in my gift card. It might come in handy later. As Wuming spoke, he raised his free hand and waved the gift card in his hand. Ignoring the fact that the three-headed dragon was already dead, his body wasn't completely dead. Even if it was a living creature, it could be stored in the gift card. Wuming's body had been stored in the gift card, so Celestia could also enter Wuming's gift card. By the way, White Yiksha, did the flames created by the sun's incarnation injure anyone? Wuming was very clear about the power of the flame pillar created by the sun's incarnation. It was a powerful flame that affected the entire outer sect of the 54545 sect. If there was anyone around, they would probably be injured if not killed. Thanks to you, no one died. When Wuming said this, White Yiksha was furious. After all, the power of that attack was too great. If White Yiksha hadn't been cautious and let the people of the Alliance retreat first, not many of them would have been able to survive. This wasn't a joke, but a fact. Not many people in the Alliance could withstand Wuming's Sunday. Although it was called an alliance, it was only a team formed by a dozen or so communities in the outer sect. Furthermore, due to absolute evil's sudden attack, it was unrealistic to instantly form a true alliance. If not for Vera's presence and the news of White Yiksha's impending arrival, few people would have been able to resist AZ Dakaha. After all, White Yiksha, White Yiksha, White Yiksha's White Yiksha, and Yiksha's White Yiksha's thought. They were the weaks, they were Yiksha. However, if they ran away, the ordinary residents of Boxting would suffer. The reason why these communities were able to take root in their respective lands was not because of their powerful strength, but also because the nearby residents helped each other. If you can save my life when I'm in danger, it's not in vain for me to take care of you. This could be considered a debt of gratitude. However, people like Shadora didn't care about debt of gratitude. Or rather, she still didn't understand the so-called debt of gratitude. In her opinion, her salamandra was taken care of by the outer sect members of the 54545 Yiksha. Therefore, she would definitely stand in front of everyone to fight against the incoming enemy. Moreover, if a Yiksha escaped, the reputation of the Yiksha would be ruined. The Yiksha world's most important component. If one had to describe it, it was equivalent to a country. However, Yiksha had a lot of countries. The name and flag of a country naturally became the two most important things. And the thing that was linked to these two was reputation. Although Yiksha didn't have a bad reputation after being attacked by the Demon King, they were no longer welcomed by others. After all, Yiksha was so weak that they couldn't even feed themselves, let alone have any value in befriending them. However, No Name did not have a bad reputation. In other words, if No Name became stronger, there would still be people who wanted to befriend him. Similarly, if your reputation was tarnished, then no one would want to befriend you. In fact, no one would want to befriend you in the future. As mentioned earlier, the number of communities in the box court world was more than the number of stars in the sky. There was no need for the other communities to be so close to you, as there were other communities that could replace you. Under the same condition with only one variable, if one community had a much better reputation than the other, any smart person would choose to associate with the community with a good reputation instead of the community with a bad reputation. From this, it could be seen how important reputation was to the community. Therefore, when they learned that Vera and White Yiksha were helping, these people gritted their teeth and took a gamble. If they won, it would increase their reputation. If they lost, then. Anyway, if they didn't gamble, they wouldn't be able to survive in the end. At the very least, these people were here. Since they were here, no matter what their mentality was, they were all family. As for his family, White Yiksha felt that it was fine as long as they didn't die. Since no one died, let's think of a way to restore the outer door of 54545. Wuming looked at the surrounding magma. Not only was a large area of the outer door of 54,545 hollowed out, but it was also covered by magma of unknown depth. Even if there were any special gifts, it would take a long time to restore the outer door of 54,545 that had turned into magma to its original state. Thou needn't worry about that. Although it will take a lot of time, it's just the ground and buildings. It's not difficult for me or the people of outer door of 54,545. White Yiksha was right. Although the resources in the North District were scarce, on the contrary, the North District had a large number of gifts that could be used for a long time. Some useful gifts could be used to remove the magma or directly transform it into the ground. The main point was that because of Wuming's monstrous fire pillar, many people were dehydrated, burned, and unconscious. Many people are injured. If this drags on, no one knows if their lives will be in danger. At the moment, we don't have time to treat them. This was what troubled White Yiksha. Although the North District had many gifts that could be used for a long time, there weren't many healing-type gifts. Moreover, there were so many people. Fortunately, Az Dakaha was defeated. If these bug-like people were to fight Az Dakaha, they would probably be sending themselves to their deaths. Since it's because of me, let me help. Wuming volunteered. Chapter 877. After Wuming finished speaking, he fully released his mind power. In an instant, it spread throughout the entire outer 54545, and he easily saw the wounded. There are so many of them. Even Wuming was shocked. See? That's right, there are so many of them. White Yiksha sighed. You did give me a shock, but, as Wuming spoke, he threw Vera, who had been obediently lying in his arms without speaking, into the sky. Ugh! Although Vera was not frightened, she still let out a whimper. Immediately after, Wuming shook his body and light covered his entire body. His body expanded greatly and turned back into a dragon's body, but this time, his body was much smaller than before. And Vera, who was thrown up high by Wuming, just happened to be sitting on Wuming's neck. Villo. Are you going to help the wounded? Vera, who was sitting on Wuming's neck, held Wuming's dragon horns tightly with both hands and looked at Wuming with her head tilted to the side. Of course, although I did get a shock, this amount is still not a problem. As Wuming spoke, he did not care about White Yiksha anymore. He flapped his wings and flew away. Really, since you're so confident, let me see. White Yiksha could only smile helplessly. Then, he slowly followed Wuming. With Wuming's current speed, it only took a few seconds to fly to the outer 54,545's realm wall. Wuming looked at the half-melted realm wall and could not help but sigh. Even the realm wall can't withstand it. Looks like I went a little overboard. However, in this way, Wuming had a further understanding of the power of his authority. Staying in the air, Wuming looked down at the people below who were panicking because of his arrival. They really did not know that Az Dakaha had been killed. And Wuming was emitting an extremely powerful aura, so it was inevitable that they would panic. However, this panic was only temporary. This was because Wuming had already started chanting the spirit of words. Along with Wuming's words, the pointer on the huge disc in Wuming's heart suddenly pointed to the direction of 7 o'clock. The incarnation of vitality was instantly activated. Wuming's whole body was exuding a strong breath of life. Then, Wuming chanted a new incantation. In the disc in his heart, the second needle of the new needle pointed to the 6 o'clock direction. God says that humans are sinful. God said that humans needed to be purified. With this, you will bestow the torrential flood upon me. In the name of the Supreme King, I will grant the people of this world equal freedom. For a moment, the flood was also activated. The so-called flood was generally a natural disaster of God. In other words, the flood came from the sky, rain. The reason why it could become a flood on the ground was because the amount of rain was too much. Then, if the amount of rain was reduced, wouldn't it become normal rain? For example, now. The sun was still hanging in the sky, and there were no dark clouds, but the rain came out of nowhere. Drop by drop, it fell on the ground and fell on the people. The area was so large that it even affected the surrounding outer doors. Why is it suddenly raining? There are no clouds either. Is it the enemy's move? Is it the work of the wyvern in the sky? This group of people was noisy, and they began to look for tools to shelter themselves from the rain. Some even took out the gift of shelter. However, not everyone thought that it was an enemy attack. Some people who were guarding their unconscious companions found that their unconscious companions had woken up. Their originally red and hot bodies had calmed down, and their injuries were basically healed. Some people who were directly drenched in the rain found that their small injuries had disappeared directly. There were also people who were not injured. Although they were not injured, they were slightly tired, but after being drenched by the rain, their fatigue disappeared. There's grass growing. A sharp-eyed person suddenly saw a blade of grass rapidly growing out of the ground. The fresh leaves were verdant and full of life. Following that, someone shouted, "This rain is full of vitality." It was not known who had a special gift, but he directly used the gift to test the rain and found out that the rain contained a lot of vitality. All kinds of phenomena made the people unable to react, but that person's words were like the last straw that broke the camel's back, making the people explode. The people who were originally sheltering from the rain no longer sheltered from the rain and directly ran into the rain. The people who took out their grace to block the rain silently put it away with their faces flushed red. The unconscious and injured people were also pushed to the open space where there was no shelter and were drenched in the rain. Looking at the people who were constantly moving below, Wuming couldn't help but shake his head. They didn't know whether the enemy was destroyed or not, but they were still so excited because of the rain of life. Sure enough, most people were a bunch of crooks. However, there were still people who were still vigilant, such as Shadora. Although Shadora and Salamandra were also receiving the baptism of the rain of life, Shadora was still constantly giving orders, such as taking care of the injured and paying attention to the investigation, and so on. Villow's ability. At this time, Vera, who was riding on Wuming's neck, also opened her mouth because she was also in the baptism of the rain of life. The power obtained from killing a god is not worth mentioning. Wuming said rather modestly. The vitality and recovery brought by the incarnation of vitality fused with the incarnation of flood to help the injured recover in the form of rain. It was a very simple use of the power. However, Vera didn't think that it was really not worth mentioning like Wuming said. Not to mention other things, this gift that could restore the vitality of so many people, Wuming casually used it, and it didn't seem to be at full strength, nor was it a one-time use. This was already very surprising. Not to mention, Wuming's reign of life affected several outer sect members. Wuming was also very helpless about this. This group of people in the alliance originally surrounded the outer sect of the 54545. If he simply released the reign of life in one place, the people in other places wouldn't be able to receive it, so he had no choice but to increase the range of the reign of life. Anyway, it didn't take much effort. In Wuming's view, it was just an apology for burning the entire outer sect of the 54545. However, Wuming forgot that at that time, the Black Mud Cave occupied the entire outer sect of the 54545. Even if he didn't burn the entire outer sect of the 54545, he still had to clean it up afterwards. As expected of you. You've really broadened my horizons once again.